Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Berkshire Mountains of western Massachusetts, near a place called October Mountain State Forest. What began as a peaceful weekend hiking trip ended with me questioning everything I thought I knew about reality and about myself. I needed to escape. After the divorce, the city felt like it was closing in around me. Every street corner, coffee shop, and park bench held some memory of Adam. 6 years of marriage dissolved by a signature on paper, followed by endless nights staring at the ceiling of my too-empty apartment. My therapist suggested a change of scenery. Something wild, she said. Reconnect with yourself in nature. I used to love hiking before I met Adam. Why not return to it? That's how I found myself alone on a Friday afternoon, parking my Honda at the trailhead of the Appalachian Trail section that cuts through October Mountain. The ranger station was already closed for the evening, but I'd researched the area thoroughly. I'd planned a 3-day loop, ambitious but doable. I clipped my backpack straps across my chest, adjusted my hiking poles, and headed into the trees. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of maple and pine, dappling the forest floor with gold. Birds called overhead, and the fresh scent of pine needles filled my lungs. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. This was exactly what I needed. My first campsite was only 3 miles in, a small clearing near a shallow stream. I'd arrive with plenty of daylight to set up camp. Perfect for easing back into backpacking after so many years. The trail rose steadily into the mountains, and I found myself breathless at times, but pleasantly so. A good kind of burn. That's when I noticed the silence. It settled around me suddenly, like someone had thrown a heavy blanket over the forest. The birds had stopped singing. No rustling in the underbrush. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. I paused, gripping my hiking poles tighter. "Hello," I called, feeling foolish even as the word left my mouth. My voice sounded flat, as if the trees themselves were absorbing the sound. A chill ran up my spine despite the warm September air. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Forests go quiet sometimes. Animals sense humans and hide, perfectly natural. I kept walking, but my easy rhythm was broken. Every few steps I found myself glancing over my shoulder. Nothing but trees and rocks and the narrow dirt path winding through them. Yet something felt off. Like being watched by hidden eyes. When I reached the clearing, I almost cried with relief. The stream gurgled cheerfully, breaking the unnatural silence. I dropped my pack and rolled my shoulders, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over me during the hike. "Just nerves," I muttered to myself. "First time back in the wilderness, it's normal to be jumpy." I set up my tent with practiced movements that came back to me easily. Adam had always handled this part on our few camping trips, insisting I'd do it wrong. Another reason our marriage had failed, his constant need to control, to correct. Out here, I could do things my way. As dusk fell, I got a small fire going and heated water for my freeze-dried pasta. The warm food and the crackling flames helped restore my sense of normalcy. Stars began appearing overhead, more than I'd seen in years. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like spilled sugar. I was just about to crawl into my sleeping bag when I heard it. A voice, distant but clear, calling a name. Sarah. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. The voice was soft, almost musical. A woman's voice, though something about it raised the hair on my arms. "Hello?" I called again. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me. I strained my ears, wondering if I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind in the trees, or the stream over rocks. The mind plays tricks when you're alone in the woods. I finished my meal quickly and doused my fire, suddenly eager for the relative safety of my tent. Inside, I zipped the door closed and wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, despite the mild temperature. My headlamp cast strange shadows on the nylon walls as I tried to lose myself in the paperback I'd brought along. I must have dozed off, because I jerked awake some time later to complete darkness. My headlamp had automatically switched off after 30 minutes. But something had woken me. A sound. Footsteps, circling my tent. Slow, deliberate steps on the forest floor. Twigs snapping. Leaves rustling. But too rhythmic to be an animal. This was bipedal. Human. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing. The footsteps completed a circuit around my tent, then stopped directly outside the door. I could see the shadow of someone standing there, cast by the moonlight against the thin fabric. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The shadow didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching. I fumbled for my headlamp and switched it on, aiming it at the door. "I know you're there." What do you want?" The light revealed nothing. No shadow, no person. Just the trees beyond my tent, swaying slightly in the breeze. I unzipped the door with shaking hands and peered out. The clearing was empty. The moon illuminated every corner, and there was nowhere someone could have hidden in the few seconds it took me to turn on my light. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat up in my sleeping bag, headlamp on, penknife clutched in my hand. Every snap of a twig outside made me flinch. Every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted and jittery, convinced I was losing my mind. Morning brought rationality with its golden light. I'd let my imagination run wild, that's all. Probably a deer had wandered by my tent in the night, and my half-asleep brain had transformed it into something sinister. I packed up quickly, eager to continue my hike and leave the strange experiences of the night behind. The second day's route would take me deeper into the forest, up to one of the higher ridges where, according to my research, I'd find spectacular views of the valley below. The morning hike was uneventful, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Several times I spun around, certain I'd catch someone following me, but the trail behind me was always empty. By midday, I'd reached a rocky outcropping that offered the promised panoramic view. The Berkshires stretched out below me, a rumpled blanket of green dotted with the occasional lake shimmering in the sun. I sat on a flat boulder and ate my lunch, trying to recapture the peace I'd felt at the beginning of my journey. That's when I saw her. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by the trunk of a massive pine. She wore what looked like a long dark dress that fluttered slightly despite the still air. Her hair was long and straight, obscuring her face as she tilted her head to watch me. "Hello," I called, relieved to see another hiker despite her odd appearance. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" She didn't respond, didn't move, just kept staring. "Are you hiking through or camping nearby?" I tried again, standing up and taking a step toward her. In a movement too quick to follow, she darted behind the tree and vanished. "Wait." I hurried to the spot where she'd been standing, but found nothing. No footprints in the soft earth, no disturbed vegetation, no sign anyone had been there at all. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I was alone on this mountain, miles from the nearest road or ranger station. Cell service was non-existent. If someone was following me, playing games with me— "Get it together, Emily," I whispered to myself. "You're letting the solitude get to you." I shouldered my pack and continued along the trail, but my enjoyment of the hike was gone. Every shadow might be her, every rustle might be footsteps. The forest that had seemed so welcoming now felt oppressive. The trees too close, the shadows too deep. By late afternoon, I reached my second campsite, another clearing, but this one near a small pond rather than a stream. I set up camp mechanically, checking over my shoulder every few minutes. As I worked, I noticed something odd about the pond. It was perfectly still, like glass despite the light breeze, and dark, too dark as if the water absorbed light rather than reflected it. I should have moved on, found another campsite. But stubbornness kept me there. That, and the knowledge that the next suitable camping area was miles away and I'd never reach it before dark. As the sun began to set, I built my fire larger than necessary, finding comfort in its light and warmth. I didn't want another night like the previous one, jumping at shadows. This time, I'd keep the fire going all night if necessary. That's when I noticed the carvings on the trees. They encircled the clearing, crude symbols etched into the bark. I hadn't seen them in the daylight, but as the shadows lengthened, they seemed to stand out in relief. Circles within circles, stick figures with too many limbs. Eyes, so many eyes, watching from the wood. My heart pounded as I approached the nearest tree, running my fingers over the markings. They were old, the edges weathered, some partially grown over by the living bark. These weren't fresh. They'd been here for years, possibly decades. I retreated to my fire, trying to convince myself they were just the work of previous campers or local kids. The alternative, that they had some purpose, some meaning, was too unsettling to contemplate. The sun slipped below the horizon, and darkness crawled from between the trees like a living thing, held at bay only by my flickering fire. The night sounds began. The hoot of an owl, the chirp of insects. Normal sounds that should have been reassuring but somehow weren't. I ate without tasting my food, eyes constantly scanning the trees at the edge of the firelight. Nothing moved out there. Nothing visible, at least. As the night deepened, the surface of the pond began to change. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of my fire, causing the water to appear to ripple and shift. But when I looked closer, I realized the fire wasn't reflected at all. The water remained obsidian dark, and yet it moved, as if something beneath the surface was stirring. I should have looked away, should have crawled into my tent and zipped it up tight and pretended I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from that uncanny movement, like black silk rippling in the wind. Then, slowly, something began to emerge from the center of the pond. A head, shoulders, arms that seemed too long, too thin, rising from the water without a splash, without disturbing the surface at all. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, could only watch in mute horror as the figure rose and rose, impossibly tall and gaunt, water streaming from its elongated limbs. It was the woman I'd seen earlier on the trail, but not a woman at all. Her face, finally visible in the firelight, was wrong. The features too sharp, the eyes too large and entirely black, like the pond itself. Her mouth stretched too wide as she smiled at me, revealing teeth like needles. "Sarah," she whispered, and though she was still in the middle of the pond, her voice sounded as if she were right beside me, her cold breath on my ear. "I'm not Sarah," I managed to choke out. "My name is Emily." Her head tilted at an impossible angle, neck bending like a broken stalk. "Sarah," she insisted, and began to move toward the shore, gliding across the water without creating so much as a ripple. Paralysis broken, I scrambled to my feet and backed away from the pond. My tent was between me and the tree line. If I could reach it, grab my pack. "Stay back," I shouted, brandishing a burning stick from the fire like a weapon. She paused at the edge of the water, her body swaying slightly like a reed in the wind. Her face was expressionless now, but those black eyes remained fixed on me with terrible intensity. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice changing, deepening as if multiple voices spoke at once. "This place is not for you." "I'm leaving," I said quickly. "First thing in the morning. I won't come back." She took a step onto the shore, and I noticed with fresh horror that her feet didn't touch the ground. She hovered an inch or two above the earth, her ragged dress hanging motionless despite her movement. "There is no mourning for those who trespass in Widow Prentice's woods," it said. "Widow Prentice?" I repeated, hoping to keep her talking while I inched toward my tent. A terrible smile spread across her face again. "She lost her Sarah to these waters in 1879. She still calls for her, still looks for her, takes others in her place when she can. Cold terror washed over me. The stories I'd read online about October Mountain mentioned nothing about any widow Prentice or a drowned child. But these woods had been here long before they became a state forest, long before hikers and campers claimed them for recreation. "I'm sorry about her daughter," I said, my voice shaking, "but I'm not Sarah. I can't help her." The thing tilted its head again, studying me. "No," it agreed after a moment, "you are not Sarah. But you might do. So alone. So sad. No one would miss you for a long, long time." It began moving toward me again, and this time I didn't wait. I lunged for my tent, grabbed my backpack, and ran. Not toward the trail. She floated between me and that path to safety, but into the darkness of the forest, away from the pond, away from the nightmare emerging from it. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me. The forest itself felt alive and malevolent, trying to hold me for the thing that pursued me. And she was pursuing. I could hear her moving through the trees behind me, a sound like dry leaves being dragged across stone. No footsteps. Just that rustling, slithering sound, and occasionally her voice, calling Sarah, in that sing-song way that made my skin crawl. I had no idea where I was going. The night was cloudy now, the moon hidden, and I dared not stop to find my flashlight in my pack. I simply ran, driven by blind panic, further and further from the trail, from safety, from anything familiar. Time lost meaning. I might have been running for minutes or hours. My lungs burned, my legs trembled. Sweat soaked my clothes despite the cool night air, but still I pushed on, terrified of what would happen if that thing caught me. I broke suddenly into a small clearing and stumbled to a halt, gasping for breath. In the center of the clearing stood a cabin. It was old, ancient even. The logs that formed its walls were gray with age, the roof sagging in the middle. No light shone from its single visible window. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time, swallowed by the forest that pressed close on all sides. Behind me, the rustling grew louder. She was getting closer. The cabin represented shelter, a place to hide. Without other options, I staggered toward it, reached the weathered door, and pushed it open. It swung inward with a groan of rusted hinges. The smell hit me first. Musty, yes, as expected from an abandoned structure, but underneath that was something else. Something sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. I fumbled in my pack for my flashlight, flicked it on, and immediately wished I hadn't. The cabin's single room was furnished sparsely. A table, a chair, a bed pushed against the far wall. But it was what hung from the ceiling that turned my blood to ice. Dolls. Dozens of them, suspended by twine from the rafters. Not children's toys, but crude things made from sticks bound together in the shape of a human, wrapped in scraps of fabric, some so old they were little more than dust-covered bundles. Each had a face painted on a small round piece of wood, 2 dots for eyes, a slash for a mouth, and each face bore a name, written in what looked horribly like dried blood. Sarah. The name repeated on doll after doll, some so faded as to be barely legible, others fresher, the letters still a rusty red. The door slammed shut behind me. I whirled to find the woman, the thing, from the pond standing between me and the exit. In the harsh beam of my flashlight, she looked even less human. Her skin had a greenish cast to it, and what I had taken for a dress appeared to be long, tattered strips of algae-covered cloth, dripping perpetually, though never forming puddles on the floor. "She will be so pleased," the thing said, its voice now a bubbling whisper. "Another Sarah for her collection." "Who?" I demanded, backing away until I hit the wall, the flashlight beam trembling in my grasp. "Widow Prentice?" The thing's face split in that terrible too-wide smile. "She has waited so long, called so many to her, but they never stay. They never replace what she lost." "And the dolls?" I asked, playing for time, my eyes darting around for a weapon, another exit, anything. "Vessels," it replied simply. "For the souls she keeps, until she finds her true Sarah." A new voice spoke from behind me, from the corner of the cabin my flashlight hadn't illuminated. "Are you my Sarah, come home to me at last?" I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see but dreading it nonetheless. A woman sat in a rocking chair that I was certain hadn't been there moments before. She was ancient, her skin like parchment stretched over bone, her white hair hanging in thin strands around a face so deeply lined it barely seemed human. She wore a black dress of antique design, high-collared and severe. Her eyes, sunken into dark hollows, fixed on me with desperate hunger. "No," I whispered. "I'm not Sarah. My name is Emily Hall." "Liar," she hissed, her voice like stone grinding on stone. "You've come back to me. My Sarah, my precious girl." She rose from her chair with surprising quickness, her movements jerky like a puppet on strings. Her gnarled hands reached for me. "Everyone lies," she continued, shuffling forward. "They all say they're not her. But I know my child. I know my Sarah. Please," I begged, pressing myself against the wall, nowhere left to retreat. "I'm not your daughter. I'm just a hiker. I got lost." "Lost," she repeated, her cloudy eyes narrowing. "Yes, lost like my Sarah. She wandered too far, went into the pond even though I forbade it. The water took her. But I found a way to bring her back. I just need a vessel." The pond creature moved to her side, its head bowed in a grotesque parody of deference. "I brought her to you, mistress, as I have brought the others." Widow Prentice reached out one skeletal hand and stroked the creature's dripping hair. "Yes, my faithful servant, found in the same waters that stole my child. It knows the price of disobedience." My mind raced. Whatever this was, hallucination, nightmare, or something beyond my understanding, I knew I wouldn't survive if I didn't find a way out. The door was blocked, the single window was too small, the walls of the cabin looked solid despite their age. "What happened to the others?" I asked, nodding toward the dolls swaying gently overhead, though there was no breeze to move them. "The other Sarahs?" A look of disappointment crossed the old woman's face. "They failed me. Their bodies accepted my Sarah's spirit, but only for a time. Then they fought, resisted, forced her out. Her expression hardened. They were punished for that." I noticed now that some of the dolls were larger than others, less crude, more like bundles wrapped in fabric with something human-sized inside them. Oh God. "You can join them," Widow Prentice said, following my gaze. "Or you can accept my Sarah willingly. Let her in. Become her." She took another step toward me. "It will be easier if you don't fight it." "No," I said, finding strength in desperation. "I won't. I can't." "Then you will hang with the others," she snarled, lunging for me with sudden speed. I dodged, barely, her fingers grazing my arm with a touch like ice. I darted around her, trying to make it to the door, but the pond creature blocked my way, its arms stretching like rubber to catch me. I was trapped between them, the witch and her servant, closing in from opposite sides. In desperation, I swung my flashlight like a club, connecting with the pond creature's head. It made a sound like water hitting hot metal and recoiled, its face denting inward like soft clay before slowly reforming. The momentary distraction was enough. I bolted for the door, yanked it open, and plunged back into the night. Behind me, I heard Widow Prentice's scream of rage, a sound so full of malice it seemed to physically push me forward, lending speed to my already pumping legs. I ran without direction, without thought, driven by pure animal panic. The forest blurred around me, trees looming out of the darkness like sentinels, roots reaching for my feet. Somewhere behind, I could hear pursuit, the witch's ragged breathing, the slithering sound of the pond creature, voices calling Sarah in horrible harmony. Then my foot caught on something, a root A stone, I couldn't tell, and I went down hard, sprawling on the forest floor. Pain shot through my ankle as it twisted beneath me. I tried to stand, but collapsed again with a cry of pain. They would catch me now. There was no more running. As if summoned by my despair, moonlight suddenly broke through the clouds, illuminating the forest around me. And I realized where I was. Not 30 feet away, the pond glimmered in the silver light, its surface still unnaturally still. Somehow, impossibly, I had run in a circle, returning to where my terror had begun. The voices grew closer. I dragged myself toward the water, not sure what I was doing, driven by some instinct I didn't understand. The witch had said the pond had taken her daughter. Perhaps it held some power over her as well. I reached the shore just as they emerged from the trees, Widow Prentice moving with that unnatural jerky gait, the pond creature gliding beside her, both their faces twisted with hunger. Nowhere left to run. "Sarah," the old woman called. "Come to Mother now." "I'm not Sarah," I shouted, my voice breaking. "Your daughter is gone. She's been gone for over 100 years. Nothing will bring her back." "Lies," she shrieked. "You will be her. You will accept her, or you will join the others in eternal punishment." She rushed forward, hands outstretched like claws, her face a mask of rage and madness. I waited until the last possible moment, then threw myself sideways. Her momentum carried her past me, directly to the edge of the pond. She teetered there, arms windmilling, and for a moment I thought she would regain her balance. Then the pond creature, still pursuing me, crashed into her from behind. With a wail of surprise and fear, Widow Prentice toppled into the dark water. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The moment she touched the surface, the pond came alive. The glass-smooth water erupted into a frenzy of motion, as if 1,000 hands were reaching up, grabbing, pulling. Widow Prentice's scream cut off as she was dragged under with unnatural speed, leaving nothing but ripples behind. The pond creature froze at the edge of the water, its black eyes wide with what looked like terror. It backed away, shaking its head. "Mistress," it moaned, "she called us, bound us, used us, but the waters remember their own." It turned those depthless eyes on me. "Run, Emily Hall, run while you can, before she returns, before she finds another way back." I didn't need to be told twice. Despite my injured ankle, I limped away from the pond as quickly as I could, following the shore until I found what I was looking for. The trail, barely visible in the moonlight, but definitely there. I don't remember much of the journey back. Pain and exhaustion blurred the hours into a single long nightmare of staggering progress, jumping at every sound, certain at any moment I would hear that sing-song voice calling Sarah from the darkness. Somehow, I made it to the ranger station by dawn. The ranger on duty took one look at my wild eyes, torn clothes, and swollen ankle and called an ambulance. I tried to tell him what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain what I'd experienced? Who would believe me? So I said I got lost, fell, spent the night trying to find my way back. A story they could understand and accept. It's been 6 months since that night in October Mountain. My ankle healed. My life in the city resumed its normal rhythm. I've even started dating again. A kind man named Thomas who never tries to control me, who listens when I speak, who doesn't mind when I insist on keeping a light on at night. I've never told anyone the full story of what happened in those woods. Until now. But I'm writing this as a warning. If you hike in the Berkshires, in October Mountain State Forest, stay on the marked trails. If you camp, avoid any pond with water too still, too dark, and if, in the silence of the forest, you hear a voice calling, "Sarah," run. Run and don't look back, because sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I hear it again. That voice, calling not for Sarah, but for me, Emily, as if it knows me now. As if something followed me out of those woods. And sometimes, in my bathroom mirror, just for a moment, I see a face behind mine, an old woman's face lined with rage and grief, waiting, patient as only the dead can be, waiting for me to return to the woods. My name is Robert Johnson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote forests of the Berkshire Mountains in western Massachusetts, near October Mountain State Forest, during what was supposed to be a simple weekend hiking trip with my dog. The locals call it Wendigo Woods, though you won't find that name on any official map. The area sits in a valley between two ridges, about 4 miles north of the Appalachian Trail crossing. I've been planning this trip for months, a chance to clear my head after my divorce was finalized. Just me and Rex, my loyal German shepherd, away from the noise of Boston and the pitying looks from friends who didn't know what to say anymore. I should have listened to the old man at the general store in Beckett. I stopped there for last-minute supplies before heading to my planned trailhead. He was restocking cans of beans when I asked if he knew anything about the trails in October Mountain. "Good hiking all over," he said, not looking up. "Except the North Valley. Best to stay on the marked trails." I laughed. "I've got GPS and good maps. I'll be fine." That's when he finally looked at me, his rheumy eyes narrowing. "Folks go missing up there, even with their fancy technology. Strange things happen when the fog rolls in." I dismissed him as a local trying to scare the city guy. I'd been hiking since I was a kid, had all the right gear, and Rex was an excellent trail dog. What could possibly go wrong? The first day was perfect. Crisp autumn air, the forest ablaze with red and gold leaves, and trails that offered challenging climbs with rewarding vistas. We covered about 8 miles before setting up camp in a small clearing next to a stream. Rex seemed happy, sniffing every inch of our campsite while I set up the tent and gathered wood for a fire. As darkness fell, I got the fire going and heated my freeze-dried beef stew. Rex got his kibble plus some of my stew as a treat. The stars came out in dazzling clarity, something you never see in the city. The only sounds were the soft gurgle of the stream and the occasional hoot of an owl. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how this was exactly what I needed. The trouble started around 2:10 a.m. I woke to Rex growling, his body tense beside me in the tent. At first I assumed it was a raccoon or maybe a deer nearby, but Rex wasn't just alert, he was terrified. His hackles were raised and he kept making a low, continuous growl unlike anything I'd heard from him before. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, reaching for my flashlight. That's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. It was a voice, distant but clear, calling my name. Robert Johnson. I froze. There was no way anyone should know my name out here. I was miles from the nearest campsite or trail shelter. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's there?" No response, just the rustling of leaves in the light breeze. I unzipped the tent and stepped out with Rex pressed against my leg, still growling. The fire had died down to embers, casting a faint red glow over our small clearing. I swept my flashlight in a slow arc around the perimeter. Nothing. But Rex wouldn't calm down. He kept staring into the darkness beyond the reach of my light, occasionally whimpering. "It's okay, buddy," I said, more to reassure myself than him. Probably just the wind playing tricks. We went back inside the tent, but neither of us slept much after that. Rex remained vigilant, occasionally growling at sounds I couldn't hear. I kept the flashlight close, flicking it on at every rustle outside. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted but relieved. Nighttime fears always seem silly in the daylight. I made coffee over a fresh fire and studied my map, planning to hike deeper into the forest toward a ridge that promised spectacular views. As we packed up, I noticed something odd. My compass was spinning erratically, never settling on north. I tapped it, thinking it was broken, but it continued its bizarre dance. I shrugged it off. I had my phone's GPS anyway. We set off around 9:00 a.m., following a faint trail that wound through increasingly dense forest. The day was overcast now, the vibrant autumn colors muted under a gray sky. After about 2 hours of hiking, I checked my phone for our location. No signal. And worse, the GPS wasn't working. The blue dot that should have shown our position was jumping all over the map, sometimes showing us miles from where we should be. Technology, I muttered, putting the phone away. I'd have to rely on my map and the useless compass. I figured if we kept heading west, we'd eventually hit one of the main trails. By noon, a fog had rolled in, thick and unnatural. It seemed to absorb sound, creating an eerie silence broken only by our footsteps on the leaf-strewn ground. The trees loomed like spectral sentinels in the mist, their forms distorted and menacing. That's when I realized we were lost. The landmarks didn't match my map. The stream we'd been following had disappeared and the terrain was unfamiliar, jagged rocks jutting from the ground like broken teeth, trees growing at impossible angles. "We'll be fine," I told Rex, who seemed increasingly anxious. "We just need to find high ground and get our bearings." We pushed on, climbing a steep incline that I hoped would take us above the fog. But as we crested the hill, what we saw made no sense. Below us lay a valley I didn't recognize, a dark bowl of ancient pines and twisted oaks surrounding a perfectly circular lake. The lake's surface was black and still, reflecting nothing. This place wasn't on any map I'd studied. "Let's go back," I said to Rex, suddenly uneasy. We turned around, intending to retrace our steps, but the trail we'd followed had vanished. There was only untamed forest in every direction. Rex whined, pressing against my leg. "It's okay, boy. We'll figure this out." That's when I heard it again. My name, called out from somewhere in the fog. "Robert, come this way. Robert Johnson." The voice was different this time, not one voice but many, speaking in eerie unison like a chorus of whispers. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice swallowed by the fog. "Show yourself." Silence. Then a low, gurgling laugh echoed through the trees. Rex barked, lunging toward the sound before I could grab his collar. He disappeared into the fog. "Rex, come back!" I ran after him, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me. I could hear him barking frantically ahead, then a yelp of pain. "Rex!" I burst into a small clearing to find my dog facing off with something. At first glance, it looked like a deer standing on its hind legs, but wrong. All wrong. Its limbs were too long, too jointed, its antlers twisted in impossible spirals, and its face. God, its face was almost human, with empty eye sockets and a mouthful of needle-like teeth. Rex was growling, but he was also trembling. Blood matted the fur on his shoulder where something had clawed him. The creature tilted its head at an unnatural angle, regarding us with those empty sockets. Then it spoke, in a voice like dry leaves scraping across stone. "Robert Johnson, you shouldn't be here." I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. I must have fallen, hit my head. This was a hallucination. "What are you?" I managed to whisper. "The Algonquians called us Wendigo," it said, its mouth barely moving. "The hungry ones, the winter spirits, but names have no meaning here." It took a step toward us. Rex barked furiously, putting himself between me and the creature. "Your protector is brave," it said, that horrible mouth twisting into what might have been a smile. "But he cannot save you from what comes with the dark." I backed away slowly, calling Rex to me. "We're leaving. We don't want any trouble." The creature made that gurgling laugh again. "Leaving? There is no leaving Wendigo Woods, Robert Johnson. Not for those who stray from the path." With unexpected speed, it lunged, not at me, but at Rex. My dog yelped as the creature's elongated fingers closed around his neck. I didn't think. I reacted. I had a hunting knife on my belt and I drew it, charging at the thing. I plunged the knife into what should have been its chest, but it felt like stabbing wood. A dark, viscous fluid oozed from the wound, smelling of rotting leaves and stagnant water. The creature shrieked, a sound so high-pitched it hurt my ears. It released Rex, who scrambled back to me, fur bristling. The Wendigo looked down at the knife embedded in its chest, then back at me. Its empty eye sockets seemed to burn with cold fire. "You shouldn't have done that, Robert Johnson," it said, voice now a multi-toned chorus of whispers. "Now they know you're here. Now they'll come for you." It backed away into the fog, its form dissolving like smoke until only its antlered silhouette remained, and then nothing. I stood there, knife in hand, my whole body shaking. Rex whined, licking his wounded shoulder. "Come on, boy," I said, my voice hardly more than a croak. "We need to find our way out of here." I checked Rex's injury. A deep gash, but not life-threatening. I cleaned it with water from my canteen and bound it with a first-aid bandage from my pack. The fog was growing thicker, and with it came an unnatural darkness. It couldn't have been later than 2 p.m., but the forest was darkening as if evening was approaching. I took out my flashlight, relieved when it worked. We needed shelter, somewhere defensible. We stumbled through the fog for what felt like hours, the terrain becoming increasingly surreal. Trees grew in spiral patterns. Rocks formed circles too perfect to be natural. And everywhere, watching eyes, I could feel them, even if I couldn't see them. As the darkness deepened, so did the cold. It seeped through my layers, a bone-deep chill that no amount of movement could dispel. My breath came out in thick clouds, and frost began to form on my beard. Finally, we came upon a small cabin in a clearing. It looked abandoned. Windows dark, the porch sagging. Under normal circumstances, I would have kept my distance from such a place, but right now, it represented walls and a roof. Protection. "What do you think, Rex?" I asked. He growled softly but didn't seem as alarmed as he had been in the presence of the Wendigo. I approached cautiously, flashlight beam playing over the weathered logs and moss-covered roof. The door hung partially open, creaking in the slight breeze. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone here?" No answer. I pushed the door open wider, wincing at its protesting groan. The beam of my flashlight revealed a single room with sparse furnishings, a rustic table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove in the corner, and a narrow bed against the far wall. A thick layer of dust covered everything, suggesting no one had been here for a long time. Relief washed over me. This would do for the night. Tomorrow, in daylight, we'd find our way back to civilization. I closed and barricaded the door with one of the chairs, then set about making a fire in the stove. Fortunately, there was a stack of dry firewood beside it, and soon a small fire was crackling, pushing back the chill. As I warmed my hands, Rex continued to pace nervously, occasionally stopping to sniff at the floorboards or walls. "What is it, boy? Mice?" But I knew it wasn't mice that had him on edge. There was something wrong with this place, something beyond the Wendigo we'd encountered. The air felt heavy, charged with a malevolent energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I searched the cabin, finding little of interest except for a leather-bound journal on a shelf above the bed. I took it down, brushing off the dust. The cover was unmarked, the pages yellowed with age. I opened it and felt my heart skip a beat. On the first page, in faded ink, was a name, William Brown, 1887. My hands trembling slightly, I turned to the first entry. April 15th, 1887. I have taken refuge in this hunting cabin after becoming separated from my companions. The forest plays tricks on the mind. I swear I've seen things moving in the fog, things that should not be. My compass spins uselessly. Tomorrow I shall try again to find my way back to Beckett. I turned the page. April the 16th. The fog will not lift. I followed what I believed to be the south trail but ended up back at this cabin. How is this possible? And the voices? I hear them calling in the night. April 17th. They know my name. How do they know my name? I saw one of them today, a twisted thing of antlers and shadow. It spoke to me, said I would never leave this place, that I belong to the woods now. April 18th. The scratching at the walls kept me awake all night. Things move in the dark. I barricaded the door and windows, but I fear it won't be enough. The hunger is getting worse. I have only 2 days of provisions left." The entries continued, becoming increasingly erratic and disturbed. William described hearing his wife and children calling to him from the fog, though he knew they were safe at home in Boston. He wrote of creatures that looked like people he knew, his brother, his hunting guide, but with subtle wrongness that revealed their true nature. The final entry, dated April 25th, was barely legible. The handwriting deteriorated into a desperate scrawl. "They're inside now. I can hear them breathing. They wear the faces of those I love. But their eyes are all wrong. This will be my final entry. If found, tell Margaret and the children I love them. And warn others, stay away from Wendigo Woods." I closed the journal, my mouth dry. William Brown had been in this exact situation, in this very cabin, over a century ago, and he hadn't made it out. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't the first to be trapped here. How many others had there been? How many had left journals that were never found, or never had the chance to record their experiences at all? A scratching sound from outside snapped me from my thoughts. Rex growled, facing the door, his body tense. I moved to the single window, carefully peering out through a gap in the rough burlap curtains. The darkness was almost complete now, my flashlight's beam barely penetrating a few feet. But in its dim glow, I could make out shapes moving in the clearing, tall, elongated figures that seemed to shift between human and animal forms. "They're surrounding us," I whispered to Rex, who responded with a low growl. I stepped back from the window, trying to think. The cabin wouldn't protect us forever. We needed a plan. In the corner of the room, something caught my eye. A trap door in the floor, partially hidden under a ragged rug. I moved the rug aside and pulled at the iron ring. The trap door opened with a groan, revealing a narrow set of stairs descending into darkness. "What do you think, Rex? Cellar?" Rex approached the opening cautiously, sniffing at the musty air wafting up. He didn't growl, but looked at me with clear apprehension. The scratching at the walls grew louder, now accompanied by whispering voices, dozens of them, all calling my name in that same eerie unison. "Robert Johnson, come out. Join us." I made a decision. "Down we go, boy." I led the way with my flashlight, Rex following reluctantly behind. The stairs creaked ominously under our weight. At the bottom was a dirt-floored cellar, small and cramped with shelves of dusty mason jars along one wall. But it wasn't a dead end. On the far side of the cellar was a rough-hewn tunnel, man-made. From the look of it, shored up with timber supports. A way out? I wondered aloud. The decision was made for us when a tremendous crash came from above, the sound of the cabin door being broken down. Heavy footsteps creaked across the floor above our heads. "In we go," I whispered to Rex, who needed no encouragement now. We entered the tunnel, which was just tall enough for me to stand bent over. Rex pressed close to my leg as we moved forward, the beam of my flashlight our only guide. The tunnel stretched on for what seemed like miles, occasionally branching. I tried to maintain a sense of direction, always choosing the path that seemed to lead upward and, I hoped, out of the forest. After what felt like hours, the tunnel began to slope upward more steeply. The air grew fresher, less stagnant. Hope flickered inside me. Finally, we reached what appeared to be the end, a wall of dirt with roots hanging from it. I pushed at it, and to my surprise, it gave way easily. It was a false wall, designed to hide the tunnel entrance. We emerged into the forest, but something had changed. The oppressive fog was gone, and through the branches I could see stars. Real stars, not the strange, swirling lights that had filled the sky in Wendigo Woods. And there, in the distance, in the welcome glow of electric lights, civilization. "We made it, Rex," I said, relief washing over me. But Rex wasn't celebrating. He stood rigid, staring back the way we had come, a low growl building in his throat. I turned, following his gaze. There, at the edge of my flashlight's beam, stood a figure. For a moment, I thought it was human. It had the shape of a man, dressed in old-fashioned hunting clothes. Then it stepped forward and I saw its face. Or rather, the absence of a face. Where features should have been was only smooth, pale skin. "William Brown," I whispered, remembering the journal. The figure tilted its head, that blank face somehow conveying curiosity. When it spoke, its voice came not from where a mouth should be, but from all around us. From the trees, the ground, the air itself. "William Brown is gone. As you should be, Robert Johnson. You don't belong here." "I'm leaving," I said, backing away slowly. "We're leaving this place." "Are you?" The figure gestured toward the lights in the distance. "How do you know what waits for you there is real? How do you know you've truly escaped?" A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" "Wendigo Woods doesn't end at the tree line, Robert Johnson. It's not a place on your maps. It's a state of being. Once you're lost here, you're always lost." "You're lying," I said, though doubt gnawed at me. "We found a way out." The faceless figure made a sound that might have been laughter. "Did you? Or did we simply change the scenery? The true test comes with the dawn. Robert Johnson, if you live to see it." With that, it melted back into the shadows, leaving me alone with Rex and my doubts. I stood there for a long moment, the weight of the figure's words pressing down on me. Was this another trick? Another layer of the nightmare? Rex whined, tugging at my pant leg, urging me toward the distant lights. I had to trust something, and I trusted my dog. "Let's go, boy," I said, and we set off toward what I desperately hoped was salvation. As we drew closer to the lights, I began to make out buildings. A small town or village. It seemed real enough with structured streets and the occasional passing car. Normal, everyday life continuing as if the horrors of Wendigo Woods didn't exist just miles away. We reached the edge of town, and I felt a surge of relief when I saw a sign. "Welcome to Beckett, M.A." We'd somehow circled back to where I'd started. The general store was closed, but a diner across the street was still open. A neon "Open 24 hours" sign buzzing in the window. I tied Rex to a post outside. He seemed calm now, reassuringly normal, and went inside. The elderly waitress looked up as the bell above the door jingled. Her eyes widened slightly at my disheveled appearance. "Lord, honey, you look like you've been through the ringer," she said, voice thick with a local accent. "Sit yourself down." I collapsed into a booth, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. "What day is it?" I asked. She gave me an odd look. "It's Sunday, dear, just past midnight." I'd only been in the woods for 2 days. It had felt like an eternity. "Coffee? You look like you could use some." I nodded gratefully, and she poured me a cup of the strongest, most wonderfully normal coffee I'd ever tasted. "You got caught in those woods, didn't you?" she asked quietly after I'd taken a few sips. "The North Valley." I looked up sharply. "How did you know?" She sighed, sliding into the seat across from me. "You've got the look. We get a few like you every year, the ones who make it back. Most don't." "You know about what's out there?" She nodded solemnly. "Wendigo Woods. Been a part of local lore since before my great-grandpappy's time. Some say it was cursed by native tribes as revenge for colonist atrocities. Others say it's always been that way. A thin place, where the veil between worlds stretches paper-thin. Why isn't it marked on maps? Why aren't there warnings?" Her weathered face creased in a sad smile. "Oh, there've been attempts. Signs go up, maps get updated, but they never last. The woods have a way of erasing evidence of themselves, keeping their secrets." I told her about the Wendigo, the faceless figure, the cabin with the tunnel. She listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if I was confirming things she already knew. "The cabin's new," she said when I finished. "At least, I haven't heard that part before. The tunnels, though, They say the early settlers dug them as escape routes during Indian raids. Later, they were used by rum runners during Prohibition. Sounds like they saved your life. What about what the faceless man said? About never truly escaping? Her expression grew serious. There's truth to that, I'm afraid. Those who've been in Wendigo woods, really been in them, not just passed through on marked trails, they carry a piece of the woods with them. Some report seeing the creatures years later, glimpsed in mirrors or standing at the foot of their beds at night. Others hear the whispering, calling them back. So I'm never free of it? She reached across the table and patted my hand. I didn't say that. The woods want you to believe that, want you to surrender to despair, but I've met folks who've put it behind them. The key is to keep moving forward, never look back, and for God's sake, don't ever return to those woods. I promised her I wouldn't. After finishing my coffee and a plate of eggs and toast that she insisted on making me on the house, I collected Rex and she pointed us toward a small motel on the edge of town. That was 3 months ago. I've since moved to Arizona, as far from Massachusetts forests as I could reasonably get. Rex and I have a small apartment in Phoenix, and I've found work as a graphic designer, something I can do remotely. Most days I can convince myself it was all some kind of hallucination brought on by stress, hate isolation, and getting lost in unfamiliar woods. The rational part of my brain constructs explanations. The Wendigo was a starving, diseased deer I encountered in the dark. The faceless man was a fellow hiker wearing a balaclava, playing a cruel prank. The cabin and tunnel were real, but not supernatural, just abandoned remnants of the area's history. But then, there are the nights when I wake up to Rex growling at the bedroom window, when I could swear I hear my name being whispered from the dark corners of my apartment. And worst of all, the nights when I dream of that circular black lake in the heart of Wendigo woods, so vivid I can smell the dank air, feel the unnatural cold. On those nights, I lie awake until dawn, Rex pressed against me, both of us listening to the scratching sounds that seem to come from inside the walls. And I wonder, as the faceless William Brown suggested, if I ever truly escaped at all. My name is James Anderson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in Mount Greylock State Reservation, Massachusetts, 3 summers ago. I've always loved hiking. There's something about the solitude of nature that calms my mind after months of grinding away at my accounting job in Boston. The deadlines, the meetings, the concrete jungle, they all fade away when it's just me in the wilderness. My therapist says it's good for my anxiety, and I never disagreed, at least not until what happened on Mount Greylock. I'd planned this trip for months, a week-long solo hike through the Berkshire's highest peak. Mount Greylock stands at 3,489 feet, not the tallest mountain by any means, but its dense forests and network of trails offered the perfect escape. The Appalachian Trail runs right through it, and I'd mapped out a route that would take me through the most remote sections. My girlfriend Eliza thought I was crazy to go alone. "James, why don't you join one of those hiking groups?" she'd suggested, concern etched across her face as I packed my gear. Or, "Let me come with you." "I need this, Elle," I'd insisted, folding my thermal underwear. "Just me and the trees and the silence. No people, no noise. I'll be fine. I've done solo trips before." What I didn't tell her was that I'd been having nightmares for weeks. Strange, disjointed dreams where I was being watched from the trees. In one particularly vivid nightmare, something tall and gaunt had been following me, always just out of sight. I dismissed them as stress dreams, manifestations of my overworked mind. Now I understand they were warnings. I arrived at the Mount Greylock Visitor Center on a Tuesday morning in late June. The air was warm but comfortable. Perfect hiking weather. The ranger at the desk, a middle-aged woman named Martha with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes, looked up from her computer as I approached. "Planning to hike?" she asked, smiling. "Yes, solo trip. Going to camp for about 5 days," I replied, unfolding my map to show her my route. She studied it carefully, her expression changing almost imperceptibly. "You're going pretty deep in, especially this section near Jones Nose and Sperry Road. Not many hikers go there this time of year." "That's kind of the point," I said with a slight laugh, looking for solitude. Martha nodded slowly. "Well, be careful around there. We've had some strange reports lately. Probably nothing, but just keep your wits about you." I raised an eyebrow. "Strange reports?" "Oh, just hikers getting turned around, losing track of time. One couple claimed they heard weird noises at night, probably just coyotes." She shrugged but didn't quite meet my eyes. "Make sure you sign our trail register before you head out." I should have pressed her further, should have asked exactly what those weird noises were, but I was eager to get started. After filling out the registry, I headed for the trailhead. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. The weather held beautiful, and the trail wound through stands of ancient maple and birch trees that filtered the sunlight into a gentle green glow. I passed a few day hikers early on, but by mid-afternoon I had the mountain to myself. The only sounds were my boots on the path, birds calling overhead, and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I made camp that first night in a small clearing about a mile off the main trail. As darkness fell, I got a fire going, heated up some dehydrated chili, and settled in with my journal and a flask of whiskey. The stars were brilliant overhead, unobscured by city lights. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how perfectly quiet. Too quiet, actually. At some point, I realized the forest had gone completely silent. No insects chirping, no night birds calling, no rustling of nocturnal creatures. Just the crackle of my fire and the sound of my own breathing. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a predator was passing nearby, causing the smaller creatures to go silent. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself staring into the darkness beyond my campfire, straining to see what might be out there. Nothing, just shadows and trees. I tried to laugh it off, taking another sip of whiskey. Getting spooked already, Anderson? Pathetic. But I didn't sleep well that night. I dozed fitfully, jolting awake at every sound, real or imagined. And when I did sleep, the dreams came again. In one, I was running through the forest, something impossibly tall and thin crashing through the trees behind me, its breath ragged and hungry. I woke up sweating, despite the cool night air. The second day dawned bright and clear. In the light of morning, my fears seemed silly, the product of an overactive imagination. I broke camp, had a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal, and hit the trail again. This section would take me deeper into the reservation, away from the more popular trails and toward Jones Nose, a rocky outcropping with spectacular views. The hiking was more challenging now, the trail less maintained. I had to consult my map frequently, and sometimes the path was little more than a game trail through the underbrush. Around midday, I stopped for lunch at a small stream and noticed something odd. Scratch marks on a nearby tree about 7 feet up the trunk. They were deep, gouging into the bark in sets of 4 parallel lines, too high and too large to be from a bear. Probably just fallen branches, I muttered to myself, but the explanation didn't sound convincing, even to my own ears. As I continued hiking that afternoon, the forest began to change subtly. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block out more of the sunlight. The air felt heavier, almost oppressive, and the vibrant greens of the forest took on a darker, more somber hue. I checked my map again, wondering if I'd somehow veered off course, but I was still on the right path. The trail was leading me through a section of old-growth forest that few hikers ventured into. The trees here were ancient, huge trunks gnarled with age, their roots twisting across the forest floor like sleeping serpents. By late afternoon, I came across a small clearing dominated by a massive, lightning-struck oak tree. It stood like a sentinel, half its branches bare and blackened, the other half still green with life. Something about it seemed wrong. The green leaves weren't moving in the breeze like they should have been. They hung perfectly still, as if painted onto the branches. I approached cautiously. As I got closer, I noticed small objects hanging from the lower branches. Little bundles of twigs bound with what looked like hair, and strange symbols carved into the trunk. Some kind of trail marker, maybe? Or perhaps kids had come up here to play at being witches. Whatever it was, it made me uneasy. I decided this wasn't a good place to camp and pushed on, even though the sun was getting low. I hiked another hour before finding a suitable campsite, a small, level area near a babbling brook. It seemed peaceful enough, but as I set up my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Several times I spun around, certain I'd catch someone or something watching me from between the trees. But there was never anything there, just the endless forest stretching in all directions. That night, I struggled to get a fire started. The wood was damp despite the dry weather, and when I finally got flames going, they burned with a strange greenish tint. I told myself it was just minerals in the wood, but the fire gave off very little heat and cast odd, shifting shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames. I didn't want to be in the dark, so I kept feeding the fire for hours, postponing sleep. The night felt colder than it should have for June, and the silence of the forest was absolute. No wind, no animals, just the occasional pop and hiss from my sickly fire. When I finally crawled into my tent, exhaustion overcoming my unease, I fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. But the dreams came again, more vivid than before. I was standing in a clearing, the same one with the lightning-struck oak. The tree was different now, though. Its bare branches were reaching toward me like skeletal fingers, and its trunk had split open, revealing a mouth-like cavity filled with darkness. From that darkness emerged a figure, tall and emaciated, with skin like bark and antlers sprouting from its skull. It moved with a jerking, unnatural gait, its limbs too long for its body, and its eyes. God, its eyes were black pools that reflected nothing. Wendigo, a voice whispered in my dream. I'd never heard the word before, but somehow I knew what it meant, a spirit of insatiable hunger, born from human greed and cannibalism. A creature that was never satisfied, always hunting, always consuming. The thing in my dream smiled, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "Jams," it rasped, my name stretching out like dried sinew. "I've been waiting for you." I woke with a start, my heart hammering against my ribs. The inside of my tent was freezing, my breath visible in the air. Outside, something was moving around my campsite. I could hear it shuffling through the leaf litter, circling my tent. Heavy breathing, punctuated by a strange clicking sound, like someone rapidly tapping their teeth together. I lay perfectly still, afraid even to breathe. My flashlight was by my head, but I didn't dare turn it on. The footsteps came closer, stopping just outside my tent. I could see a shadow against the fabric, something tall, standing upright. It sniffed loudly, and then I heard a low, rumbling growl that no human throat could make. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed with fear. It might have been minutes or hours. Eventually, the footsteps receded, and the forest returned to silence. I didn't sleep again that night, lying awake with my knife clutched in my hand until the first pale light of dawn seeped through the tent fabric. When I emerged from my tent, the campsite appeared undisturbed. There were no strange footprints, no signs that anything had been there. I might have convinced myself it was just a nightmare if not for one thing: the fire pit. The ashes were scattered as if something had raked through them, and arranged in the center was a small pile of bones. They looked like they might have been from a rabbit or squirrel, picked clean and carefully stacked. I broke camp faster than I ever had before. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely roll up my sleeping bag. I needed to get back to civilization, to other people. I abandoned my original route and decided to take the most direct path back to the visitor center. But as I consulted my map, nothing looked right. The landmarks didn't match up with where I thought I was. The stream that should have been to the east was nowhere to be found. Had I somehow gotten turned around in the night? I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but there was no signal. Not surprising in these remote woods. I had a compass, though, and decided to head southeast, which should eventually lead me to a main trail. I hiked for hours, pushing through increasingly dense undergrowth. The terrain became unfamiliar, steeper, rockier, with fewer markers. By midday, I had to accept the truth. I was lost. The realization made my stomach clench. I'd been hiking these mountains for years and had never gotten seriously lost before. I was careful, prepared. This shouldn't be happening. I tried to stay calm, remembering my wilderness training. When lost, stay put. But something told me that staying in one place would be dangerous. I needed to keep moving, to find my way back to the marked trails. As the day wore on, the forest continued to change around me. The trees grew more twisted, their branches reaching down like grasping hands. The ground became soggy underfoot, though I couldn't remember there being a wetland in this part of the reservation. The air took on a fetid smell, like rotting vegetation and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, the smell of old blood. By late afternoon, I stumbled upon a second clearing, and my blood ran cold. In the center stood another lightning-struck tree, identical to the one I'd seen the day before. The same half-dead oak, the same unmoving green leaves, the same strange bundles hanging from the branches. "That's impossible," I whispered. I couldn't have walked in a circle. I'd been heading southeast all day. As I stood there trying to make sense of it, I noticed a movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just shadows between the trees. But I could feel it watching me, whatever it was. The weight of its gaze made my skin crawl. I hurried away from the clearing, no longer caring which direction I went as long as it was away from that tree. The forest grew darker as the sun began to set, and I knew I needed to find a place to camp for the night. The thought of spending another night out here made my chest tight with anxiety. But I had no choice. I found a small hollow between two large boulders that offered some protection and quickly set up my tent. This time, I couldn't get a fire started at all. The lighter would spark, the kindling would catch, but the flames would die out almost immediately, as if suffocated by the very air around them. I retreated to my tent as darkness fell, armed with my knife, flashlight, and the can of bear spray I'd brought along. I was too tense to eat, though I forced myself to drink water and chew on a protein bar. My mind kept replaying the events of the past 2 days, trying to find a rational explanation for what was happening. Maybe I'd gotten sick, some kind of fever that was causing hallucinations. Or maybe there were toxic mushrooms in these woods, and I'd been exposed to spores. Or maybe, and this thought made me shiver, maybe the folk stories were true. Maybe there were things in these ancient forests that defied rational explanation. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke to a sound that made my blood freeze. Someone, or something, calling my name. "James." It came, a rasping whisper that seemed to surround the tent. "James, I'm hungry." I sat up, fumbling for my flashlight. The voice came again, closer now, right outside the tent. "Let me in, James. I'm so hungry, so very hungry." The voice was wrong. It sounded like multiple voices layered together, some high and childlike, others deep and guttural, but all of them saying my name, all of them hungry. The side of my tent pushed inward, as if something was pressing against it. I could see the outline of a hand with fingers that were too long, too thin. "No!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "Get away from me!" The hand withdrew, and for a moment there was silence. Then a low laugh that made the air vibrate. "You can't hide from me, James. This is my mountain, My forest, and you're trespassing. Something slashed at the tent, ripping through the fabric like it was paper. I caught a glimpse of long, curved claws and a skeletal arm before I scrambled backward, fumbling with the zipper on the opposite side of the tent. I burst out into the darkness, bear spray in one hand, knife in the other. The night was moonless, the starlight barely penetrating the dense canopy above. My flashlight beam swept wildly across the clearing as I looked for my attacker. There, between two trees, a figure standing impossibly tall, at least 8 feet high. It was rail-thin, its skin a mottled gray-green that looked like bark in the flashlight beam. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands with elongated fingers and curved, blackened claws. Antlers rose from its skull, branching out like a crown of bones. But its face, God, its face was the worst part. It was almost human, but stretched and distorted, the jaw too long, the mouth filled with jagged teeth. And its eyes reflected my flashlight like an animal's, 2 glowing red orbs in the darkness. Wendigo, I whispered, the word from my dream suddenly on my lips. The creature tilted its head, the movement jerky and inhuman. Smart boy, it rasped. The old ones used to know me, used to fear me, but you modern ones, you've forgotten. It took a step forward, moving with a strange, disjointed gait. That makes you easy prey. I raised the bear spray, my hand trembling. Stay back. Or what? It asked, its mouth stretching into a mockery of a smile. You'll season yourself for me? I prefer my meat afraid. Fear makes the meat sweeter. It lunged forward with unexpected speed. I squeezed the trigger on the bear spray, releasing a cloud of capsaicin into the air between us. The creature shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and recoiled momentarily. I didn't waste the opportunity. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping my face and tearing at my clothes. I had no idea which direction I was going, only that I needed to get away from that thing. Behind me, I could hear it recovering, its footsteps pounding the earth as it gave chase. You can't escape, James, it called, its voice sounding closer than it should have been. No one escapes the Wendigo. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. I splashed through streams, scrambled over fallen logs, and pushed through thorn bushes that left my arms bloody. But no matter how fast or far I ran, I could hear it behind me, always gaining. Finally, I stumbled into another clearing and froze in horror. In the center stood the lightning-struck oak tree, exactly as I'd seen it twice before. I'd somehow circled back to the same spot again. No, I panted. This isn't possible. My forest, came the rasping voice from the darkness behind me. My rules. I spun around, knife held out in front of me like a talisman. The Wendigo emerged from the trees, moving with that same unnatural gait. It was playing with me, I realized. It could have caught me at any time, but it was enjoying the chase, savoring my fear. Why me? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why are you doing this? The creature tilted its head again, studying me with those glowing red eyes. You came to my mountain seeking solitude. I'm granting your wish, eternal solitude. It gestured around at the forest. All those who came before you are still here, still alone, still hungry. As if on cue, I heard other sounds from the darkness surrounding the clearing. Movements, whispers, the snap of twigs underfoot, and then I saw them. Pale, emaciated figures moving between the trees. They had once been human, I could tell, but were now twisted parodies of people. Their skin was stretched tight over their bones, their eyes sunken and hollow. Some walked on all fours, others dragged themselves along with elongated arms. All of them stared at me with the same desperate hunger in their eyes. My children, the Wendigo said, gesturing toward the wretched creatures. Those who came to my mountain and were found wanting. Those who gave in to the hunger. One of the figures emerged further into the clearing and I recoiled in shock. It was a man, or had been once. Now his limbs were distorted, his jaw stretched to accommodate teeth that were too large for a human mouth. But it was his eyes that hit me hardest. They were aware, intelligent. This thing, whatever it had become, knew what it was. "Help me," it whispered, the words mangled by its misshapen mouth. "So hungry." "Ethan disappeared in these woods 3 years ago," the Wendigo said conversationally. "Ranger Martha has his photo on her missing persons board. Such a shame they never found him." It made a sound that might have been a laugh. Or rather, they never found what was left of him after he ate his hiking companion. The creature that had been Ethan whimpered, shrinking back from the Wendigo's gaze. "You see, James, that's the beauty of my curse. The hunger never stops. It grows and grows until you'll do anything to satisfy it. Even turn on your friends, your family." It took another step toward me. "That's how I was born, you know. A man lost in these woods, starving. He ate his companions, then his wife, then his children, and in doing so, he became me." I thought of the ranger's warnings, the strange reports she'd mentioned. How many people had vanished in these woods over the years? How many had been taken by this thing? "I won't become like you," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "They all say that," the Wendigo replied softly, "until the hunger starts." It was close now, close enough that I could smell its breath, like meat left too long in the sun. It reached for me with those elongated fingers, the claws gleaming in the dim light. I slashed at it with my knife, catching it across the forearm. It hissed in pain, black ichor oozing from the wound. But instead of retreating, it grabbed my wrist with its other hand, its grip like iron. I felt my bones grinding together, and the knife fell from my nerveless fingers. "Brave," it said, bringing its face close to mine, "but foolish." I still had my flashlight in my other hand. In a desperate move, I swung it hard, catching the Wendigo across the temple. It wasn't much of a blow, but it was enough to surprise the creature and make it loosen its grip slightly. I tore free, snatching up my knife and backing away. The Wendigo's children, the transformed hikers, were closing in, forming a circle around us. I was trapped. "There's no escape, James," the Wendigo said, its voice almost gentle now. "Accept your fate. Join my family. Let the hunger take you." As it spoke, I felt something strange, a gnawing emptiness in my stomach that hadn't been there before, a twisting, aching hunger that grew with each passing second. My mouth watered, and I found myself looking at the emaciated creatures not with fear, but with a different kind of interest. "Yes," the Wendigo whispered, seeing the change in my eyes. "You feel it now, don't you? The beginning of the transformation, the hunger that never ends." I shook my head, fighting against the alien sensation. This wasn't right. This wasn't me. The Wendigo reached toward me again, and this time I didn't back away. I couldn't. The hunger was paralyzing, overwhelming. "That's it," it crooned. "Give in. It's easier that way." Its clawed hand touched my face, the sharp points just grazing my skin. I could feel a coldness spreading from where it touched me, a numbness that crept through my body. The hunger intensified, becoming a raging fire in my gut. I looked into the Wendigo's eyes and saw my reflection there. But it wasn't me anymore. My face was already changing, elongating, my teeth growing sharp and pointed. I was becoming like them. "No!" I shouted, more to myself than to the creature. With every ounce of willpower I had left, I jerked away from its touch and plunged my knife into its chest. The Wendigo screamed, a sound so loud and terrible it seemed to shake the very air. Black ichor spurted from the wound, burning where it touched my skin. The creature staggered backward, looking down at the knife embedded in its chest with something like surprise. "Impossible," it hissed. "No mortal weapon can harm me." But the evidence was before us both. The Wendigo was wounded, ichor flowing freely from the gash. Something was different about this confrontation. Maybe it was the specific knife I carried, a gift from my grandfather, its handle made of bone and inscribed with symbols I'd never understood. Or maybe it was simply that I'd fought back against the hunger, refused to let it consume me. The Wendigo's children were agitated now, moving restlessly around the edges of the clearing. I could sense their confusion, their fear. Their master was wounded, vulnerability showing through its immortal facade. "You cannot kill me," the Wendigo rasped, clutching at the knife still embedded in its chest. "I am eternal. I am the forest." "Maybe not," I said, finding strength in the creature's obvious pain. "But I can hurt you. I can mark you, and I can escape you." I lunged forward and grabbed the knife, twisting it deeper into the Wendigo's chest. It howled in agony, its body convulsing. The transformed hikers scattered, fleeing back into the darkness of the forest. Without their master's will holding them, they reverted to frightened, feral creatures. The Wendigo fell to its knees, its tall frame folding awkwardly. It reached for me one last time, claws grasping at empty air. "The hunger will find you," it whispered. "It always does." Then it collapsed, its body shuddering. The antlers fell from its head, crumbling to dust. The body itself began to sink into the forest floor, roots emerging from the ground to wrap around it, pulling it down. Within moments, all that remained of the Wendigo was a dark stain on the earth and my knife, lying clean and unmarked in the dirt. I stood there, panting, waiting for the hunger to overwhelm me again. But it was receding, fading like a bad dream. The forest around me seemed different now, too, brighter, less oppressive. The lightning-struck oak no longer looked menacing, just old and weather-beaten. I picked up my knife and looked around the clearing. Dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the trees. And there, through a gap in the foliage, I could see something I hadn't noticed before. A man-made structure, a fire tower rising above the trees in the distance. I made my way toward it, finding that the forest no longer seemed to confuse and redirect me. The paths were clear, the landmarks recognizable. By mid-morning, I reached the tower and was able to orient myself on my map. I was on the far eastern side of the reservation, miles from where I thought I'd been. It took me the rest of the day to hike back to the visitor center. I was exhausted, scratched, and bruised, but alive. When I stumbled into the building, Ranger Martha looked up from her desk, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mr. Anderson, we were just about to send out a search party for you. You missed your check-in date." I blinked, confused. "What day is it?" "Saturday," she said. "You've been out there for 5 days." 5 days. It had felt like an eternity and no time at all. "Are you okay?" Martha asked, concern evident in her voice. "You look like you've been through hell." I considered telling her everything: the Wendigo, the transformed hikers, the hunger that had almost taken me. But I knew how it would sound. Dehydration, exhaustion, hallucinations, that's what they would say. "Got a little lost," I said instead, "but I found my way back." Martha nodded, though her eyes lingered on the scratches on my face and the tears in my clothing. "Well, you're safe now. That's what matters." I stopped by the missing persons board on my way out. There he was, Ethan Miller, 27, last seen hiking near Jones Nose 3 years ago. His smiling face looked out from the photograph, no hint of the horror he would encounter in those woods. Next to him were other faces, other names, so many lost over the years. I wonder sometimes if I truly killed the Wendigo, or if I just wounded it, drove it into hiding. The hunger it tried to awaken in me has never completely disappeared. On dark nights, I still feel it stirring, a hollow ache in my gut that no food can satisfy. And in my dreams, I still hear its voice, whispering to me from the shadows of Mount Greylock. "The hunger will find you. It always does." I haven't gone hiking since. My name is Benjamin Collins, and I am 34 years old. This happened in October Mountain State Forest, Massachusetts, during what was supposed to be a weekend hiking trip with my friends from work. There were 4 of us. Myself, a software developer with a penchant for outdoor photography. Melissa Scott, our marketing director, always composed and pragmatic. Trevor Hayes, an account manager who fancied himself an outdoorsman despite growing up in downtown Boston. And Danielle Foster, our newest team member, quiet but surprisingly resilient. We all worked for a tech startup in Cambridge and had been planning this trip for months as a way to decompress from the stress of our upcoming product launch. October Mountain State Forest seemed perfect. Massachusetts' largest state forest with over 16,000 acres of wilderness, hiking trails, and enough isolation to escape the constant ping of email notifications. What we didn't know was that the isolation would become our worst enemy. The trouble began on our second day. We'd spent the first night at a designated campsite near the Appalachian Trail, but Trevor had convinced us to venture deeper into the forest, away from the marked paths. He'd heard about a hidden waterfall that few hikers ever discovered, and the prospect of capturing it for my photography portfolio was too tempting to pass up. "It's only about 4 miles off trail," Trevor insisted, pointing to a crudely drawn map he'd found on some obscure hiking forum. "We can make it there by noon, spend some time at the falls, and still set up camp before dark." Melissa voiced concerns about leaving the marked trails, but Trevor's enthusiasm was infectious, and even cautious Danielle seemed excited by the adventure. I should have sided with Melissa. I should have remembered the stories my grandfather used to tell about these mountains. But I didn't. By mid-afternoon, it was clear we were lost. The forest had grown denser, the trees taller and closer together, blocking much of the sunlight. The temperature dropped noticeably, despite it being early October with relatively mild weather forecasted. "Check the GPS again," Melissa said, her voice tight with controlled anxiety. I pulled out my phone, but the GPS icon just spun uselessly. No signal, and the battery's at 15% even though I charged it fully last night. Trevor tried his phone with the same result. "That's weird. Mine's nearly dead, too." Danielle's and Melissa's phones showed the same issue. Batteries inexplicably drained. No signal. We still had our paper map, but without knowing our precise location, it was of limited use. "We should head back the way we came," Melissa suggested. "I think that's east," Trevor said, pointing. "The sun's over there, so—" "That's west," I corrected. "The sun sets in the west." "I know that," Trevor snapped, uncharacteristically irritable. "I meant we should go opposite of the sun." We started walking in what we hoped was the direction back toward the main trail. The forest seemed different somehow. The trees unfamiliar. The ground cover changed. Even the bird calls sounded wrong, more like distant crying than chirping. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Danielle asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'd been feeling it too, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of eyes following our every move. I'd dismissed it as paranoia, but hearing Danielle say it aloud made my skin crawl. "It's just the woods," Trevor said dismissively, but I noticed how his eyes darted nervously between the trees. As daylight began to fade, we reluctantly accepted that we needed to make camp where we were. We found a small clearing, not ideal but serviceable, and quickly set up our tents. The temperature continued to drop rapidly, and by the time we had a fire going, we could see our breath in the air. "This isn't normal for October," Melissa said, rubbing her hands together near the flames. "It feels like December." "Weather in these mountains can be unpredictable," Trevor offered, though his expertise was beginning to sound hollow. We heated some dehydrated meals over the fire and ate in relative silence, the weight of our situation dampening conversation. The forest around us had gone eerily quiet. No insects chirping, no nocturnal animals rustling in the underbrush. Just silence, occasionally broken by the crack and pop of our fire. That's when we heard it, a sound that still haunts my nightmares. A long, keening wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't human, but it wasn't quite animal either. It rose and fell like someone crying out in pain, but with an otherworldly quality that made my blood run cold. "What the hell was that?" Trevor whispered, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Probably just a fox or coyote," Melissa suggested, but her white-knuckled grip on her camping mug betrayed her fear. "That was no fox," Danielle said. She'd gone very pale. "My grandmother was part Algonquin. She used to tell me stories about these mountains, about the Wendigo." "The what?" Trevor asked. "It's a spirit," Danielle explained, her voice trembling slightly. "A malevolent entity that possesses humans, gives them an insatiable hunger for human flesh. The Algonquin believed it was created when a human resorted to cannibalism to survive harsh winters." "That's just a legend," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I'd heard similar stories from my grandfather, but had always dismissed them as campfire tales meant to scare children away from wandering too far into the woods. The wail came again, closer this time, cutting through the night like a blade. We instinctively huddled closer to the fire. "Legend or not, I don't like this," Melissa said. "We should take turns keeping watch tonight." No one argued. We decided I would take first watch, followed by Trevor, then Melissa, with Danielle taking the pre-dawn shift. As the others crawled into their tents, I stoked the fire and tried to convince myself that we were just spooked, that there was a rational explanation for everything we'd experienced. The forest remained unnaturally silent during my watch, save for that horrible wailing, which came at irregular intervals, sometimes sounding miles away, other times terrifyingly close. I kept the fire blazing, finding comfort in its light and warmth. When it was time to wake Trevor for his shift, I approached his tent and called his name softly. No response. I unzipped the tent flap and peered inside, empty. The sleeping bag was there, rumpled as if recently used, but Trevor was gone. A spike of panic shot through me. I quickly checked Melissa's and Danielle's tents, finding both women asleep. I woke them and broke the news. "He probably just went to relieve himself," Melissa reasoned, but the worry in her voice was evident. "Without saying anything, in these temperatures?" I shook my head. "Trevor!" I called out into the darkness beyond our campfire. "Trevor, can you hear me?" The only answer was that unearthly wail, now seeming to come from directly ahead of us, perhaps 100 yards into the forest. "We need to find him," I said, grabbing my flashlight. "We can't go out there in the dark," Melissa argued. "We could get lost too." "What if he's hurt?" Danielle asked, her eyes wide with fear. What if something got him? The indecision was agonizing. In the end, we compromised. We would stay together, keep the fire going, and call for Trevor every few minutes. If he didn't return by dawn, we'd search for him in the daylight. None of us slept. We huddled by the fire, jumping at every sound, calling Trevor's name until our voices grew hoarse. The wailing continued intermittently, sometimes followed by what sounded like branches breaking, as if something large was moving through the forest. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, we saw him. Trevor, standing at the edge of our clearing, partially hidden behind a large pine tree. Relief flooded through me. "Trevor! Jesus, man, where have you been? We were worried sick." He didn't respond. He just stood there, half hidden, unmoving. "Trevor," Melissa called, standing up. "Are you okay?" Slowly, he stepped out from behind the tree, and the relief I'd felt evaporated like morning dew. There was something wrong with him. His movements were stiff, jerky, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. His clothes were torn and dirty, as if he'd been dragged through the underbrush. But it was his face that turned my blood to ice. His eyes were wide and vacant, his mouth stretched into an unnatural smile that showed too many teeth. "I found it," he said, his voice flat and hollow, nothing like the Trevor we knew. I found the waterfall. You all need to see it. Trevor, what happened to you? Danielle asked, taking an involuntary step back. Nothing happened. I'm fine. Better than fine. That terrible smile never wavered. I've never been so hungry, though. I'm starving. Aren't you all hungry? As he spoke, he took a step forward, and I noticed something dark staining the front of his jacket, something that looked horribly like blood. Where have you been all night? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. Exploring. Learning. There's so much to discover in these woods. So much to taste. He took another step toward us, and now I could smell him. A rank, fetid odor like rotting meat. Come with me. I want to show you what I found. I think we should pack up and head back to the trail, Melissa said firmly, moving closer to Danielle and me. All of us, including you, Trevor. No. The word came out as a snarl, animalistic and raw. You need to see. You need to understand. You need to feed. He lunged forward with impossible speed. I shoved Melissa and Danielle back, putting myself between them and whatever Trevor had become. He crashed into me with enough force to knock me to the ground, his hands wrapping around my throat. His face was inches from mine, that rictus grin still in place, but his eyes were no longer vacant. They burned with a primal hunger that was entirely inhuman. I fought desperately, trying to break his grip. Despite being roughly the same size as me, Trevor now possessed strength that seemed superhuman. Black spots began to dance at the edges of my vision as his thumbs pressed into my windpipe. Suddenly, there was a dull thunk, and Trevor's grip loosened. He slumped sideways, revealing Melissa standing over us, holding the cast-iron skillet we'd used to cook dinner the night before. "Run!" she screamed. I scrambled to my feet as Trevor began to stir. We didn't take time to grab our tents or most of our gear, just our backpacks, which we'd kept packed with essentials. Melissa, Danielle, and I fled into the forest, in the direction we hoped would lead us back to civilization. Behind us, an inhuman howl of rage tore through the morning air. It was the same wailing cry we'd heard throughout the night, but now we knew its source. Trevor, or whatever was wearing Trevor's skin, was coming after us. We ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, scrambling over fallen logs, our only thought to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and the horror pursuing us. The forest seemed to be actively working against us. Branches whipped at our faces, roots rose up to trip us. The ground itself became treacherous with hidden holes and loose stones. "We need to find the trail," Melissa gasped between labored breaths. "Which direction?" Danielle asked, her face scratched and bleeding from the whipping branches. I pulled out my compass, grateful I'd put it in my pocket rather than leaving it in the tent. "East. The main trail should be east of here." We adjusted our course, still moving as quickly as we dared through the difficult terrain. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but I didn't trust the silence. Whatever had taken over Trevor knew these woods better than we did. It could be circling around, lying in wait. After what felt like hours of punishing travel, we stumbled upon a small, fast-moving stream. "We should follow it downhill," I suggested, remembering one of the few wilderness survival tips I knew. Streams eventually lead to rivers, rivers to towns. "What about Trevor?" Danielle asked, her voice small and frightened. Melissa and I exchanged a grim look. "That wasn't Trevor," Melissa said quietly. "Not anymore." We followed the stream, moving more carefully now but still maintaining urgency. The day grew warmer, more like the October weather we'd expected, which I took as a good sign. Perhaps we were leaving behind whatever malevolent influence had affected our campsite, and Trevor. Around midday, we stopped briefly to rest and eat some of the energy bars we'd stuffed into our packs. No one spoke much. We were all lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what had happened. "Danielle," I finally said, "you mentioned a Wendigo last night. What exactly did your grandmother tell you about them?" Danielle took a sip from her water bottle before answering. "She said they were once human, but after turning to cannibalism, they transformed into creatures of terrible hunger. They're said to be emaciated, with elongated limbs, but incredibly strong. They can mimic human voices to lure victims. Some stories say they can possess people too. And how do you stop them? Melissa asked. Danielle's expression grew even more troubled. The traditional belief is that they can only be killed with fire or silver. We had neither. My lighter had been left behind with our camping equipment, and none of us owned anything silver. Let's keep moving, I said, standing up. The more distance we put between us and that thing, the better. We continued along the stream, which gradually widened as other tributaries joined it. The forest began to thin slightly, allowing more sunlight to penetrate the canopy. Our spirits lifted as we spotted what appeared to be a man-made structure ahead, a small wooden bridge crossing the stream. A bridge means a trail, Melissa said, quickening her pace. Indeed, on the other side of the bridge was a narrow but well-defined hiking path. A weathered wooden sign indicated we were on the Freeman Trail, which connected to the Appalachian Trail approximately 2 miles north. "We made it," Danielle breathed, tears of relief welling in her eyes. "Let's not celebrate yet," I cautioned, scanning the forest around us. "We're still a long way from the car." We followed the Freeman Trail northward, moving much faster now on the clear path. For the first time since Trevor's transformation, I began to believe we might actually escape this nightmare. The forest here seemed normal. Birds sang, squirrels chattered, the oppressive silence of the previous night completely absent. Our relief was short-lived. As we rounded a bend in the trail, we came face to face with Trevor. He looked worse than before, his clothes now in tatters, his skin pale and stretched tight over his frame, as if he'd lost 20 pounds overnight. His fingers had elongated grotesquely, ending in sharp, blackened nails that looked more like claws. But it was his face that had undergone the most horrifying transformation. His jaw had somehow distended, allowing for a mouth full of jagged, pointed teeth. Only his eyes remained recognizably Trevor's, and they lit with malicious glee when they fixed on us. "Friends," he said, the word distorted by his malformed mouth. "You ran away. That hurt my feelings." We froze, rooted to the spot by shock and terror. He stood directly in our path, blocking the way to the Appalachian Trail. Behind us lay miles of unknown forest. "What do you want from us?" Melissa demanded, her voice remarkably steady despite the horror confronting us. Trevor, the thing that had been Trevor, tilted his head at an impossible angle. "Want? I want you to understand, to join me, to feed." He took a step toward us. "I was like you once, afraid, limited, hungry but never satisfied. Now I understand true hunger, true satisfaction." His tongue, unnaturally long and pale, flicked out to wet his lips. "Let me show you." He lunged, moving with that same unnatural speed he'd displayed at the campsite. This time, however, we were prepared. We scattered in different directions, Melissa and Danielle diving to one side of the trail, me to the other. What happened next is still a blur in my memory. I remember the creature pursuing Danielle, who was the smallest and presumably easiest target. I remember grabbing a fallen branch, swinging it with all my strength at the thing's head. I remember it turning on me, those horrible teeth snapping inches from my face, the overwhelming stench of rot and decay making me gag. Melissa saved us again. While the creature was focused on me, she crept up behind it and drove her hiking pole deep into its back. The metal pole punched through with a sickening squelch, and the creature let out a shriek of pain and rage. It wasn't enough to kill it, but it bought us precious seconds. We ran, abandoning the trail and plunging into the forest, trying to lose ourselves among the trees. The creature's howls of fury followed us, seeming to come from all directions at once. We didn't stop running until we physically couldn't continue. My lungs burned, my legs trembled with exhaustion. We'd ended up in a small rocky hollow, partially concealed by a fallen tree. "Did we lose it?" Danielle gasped, clutching her side. I don't know, I admitted, trying to catch my breath. It seems to know these woods too well. What was that thing? Melissa asked. It doesn't look human anymore. It's the Wendigo, Danielle said with certainty. Just like my grandmother described. It's happening fast. The transformation. In the stories, it usually takes longer, but what? She said October Mountain was special. Thin. Like the barrier between our world and the spirit world doesn't hold as firmly here. Great, Melissa muttered. So, what do we do? I checked my compass again, trying to orient ourselves. The Appalachian Trail should still be north of us. If we can reach it, we're more likely to find other hikers, maybe a ranger. And if that thing finds us first? Danielle asked. I had no good answer. We rested for as long as we dared, then set off again, moving more cautiously now, trying to balance speed with stealth. The day was waning, shadows lengthening across the forest floor. None of us voiced the terrifying thought that we might have to spend another night in these woods. As twilight approached, we came across something unexpected. A small cabin, nestled in a clearing. Smoke rose from its chimney, suggesting occupation. "Hello?" I called out, approaching carefully. "We need help." The cabin door opened, revealing an elderly man with a weathered face and sharp, assessing eyes. He held a shotgun casually at his side. "You folks look like you've had a rough time of it," he observed, taking in our scratched faces, torn clothing, and obvious exhaustion. "We're lost," Melissa explained. "Our friend, there was an accident. We need to get back to civilization, call for help." The man studied us for a moment longer, then nodded. "Name's Earl Blackwood. Been living in these woods for 30 years. Come inside before it gets dark. You don't want to be out there at night." We followed him gratefully into the cabin, which was sparsely furnished but warm and secure. Earl set down his shotgun and gestured for us to sit at a rough wooden table while he put a kettle on the wood stove. "Now," he said, turning back to us, "tell me what really happened to your friend." Something in his tone made it clear he wouldn't accept our vague explanation. We exchanged glances, silently debating how much to reveal. "You wouldn't believe us," I finally said. Earl's laugh was short and humorless. "Try me. I've seen things in these mountains that would turn your hair white." So we told him everything. The drained phone batteries, the unnatural cold, Trevor's disappearance and horrific return, his transformation, our desperate flight through the forest. Earl listened without interruption, his expression grave but unsurprised. "The Wendigo," he said when we'd finished. "This mountain has a history with them. Most years they sleep, dormant. But sometimes they wake, hungry." "You believe us?" Danielle asked, clearly shocked. "Girl, I've lived alone in these woods for 3 decades. You think I haven't encountered things that defy explanation?" He poured hot water into mugs, adding tea bags. "The real question is, what are you going to do about your friend?" "Do," Melissa repeated. "We need to get out of here. Call search and rescue, the police." Earl snorted. "And tell them what? That your buddy turned into a mythological monster? They'll have you committed." He sipped his tea thoughtfully. "Besides, by the time authorities get here, that thing will have either moved on to new hunting grounds or gone back into hiding. Either way, they won't find it, and more hikers will go missing over the years." "So what's the alternative?" I asked, anger edging into my voice. "We hunt it ourselves." "With what? It's faster and stronger than us and apparently unkillable." "Not unkillable," Earl corrected. "Just difficult to kill. Silver works, like the old stories say. So does fire." He set down his mug and walked to a trunk in the corner of the cabin. From it, he withdrew what looked like a flare gun, but modified. "Phosphorus flares," he explained. "Burns hot enough to take down a Wendigo if you hit it square. Been keeping these ready, just in case." "You've done this before," Danielle realized. Earl's eyes clouded with some distant memory. "Once, 20 years ago. Didn't end well for my hunting partner." He shook his head, dispelling the recollection. "But it needs to be done. That thing wearing your friend's skin will kill again. It won't stop." "We should just leave," Melissa insisted. "Get back to town. Let someone else handle this." "Who?" Earl challenged. "The rangers don't come this deep into the forest, especially not at night. The local police wouldn't believe you, and even if they did, they're not equipped for this. By the time anyone official gets here, your friend will have killed again. Could be a family camping with kids next time." His words hung heavy in the air. As much as I wanted to leave this nightmare behind us, I couldn't deny the logic. If we just fled, others would die. "I'll go," I said finally. "I'll help you stop it." "Ben, no," Melissa protested. "He's right, Mel. We can't just walk away, not if there's a chance we can stop this thing." I turned to Earl. "We need a plan, though. The thing is fast and strong." Earl nodded approvingly. "We'll need bait, something to draw it out, make it come to us rather than hunting it through the forest at night." "Bait?" Danielle asked nervously. "It's hunting you three," Earl said bluntly. "It had a taste of your friend. Now it wants the rest of you. That's how it works. It fixates on a group, picks them off one by one." We spent the next hour formulating a plan. Earl knew of a clearing about half a mile from the cabin, open ground with good visibility, but close enough to the dense forest that the Wendigo would feel secure approaching. We would light a fire there, making our presence obvious. Earl and I would conceal ourselves in strategic positions with the flare guns, while Melissa and Danielle would remain by the fire, appearing vulnerable. "I don't like using you ladies as bait," Earl said, "but we need to draw it into the open. Once it shows itself, aim for the chest or head with the flares. Don't hesitate. It won't give you a second chance." Melissa and Danielle were understandably terrified but determined. We were all bound by the same grim understanding. We had unwittingly brought this horror into our lives, and now we had a responsibility to end it before others suffered the same fate. As night fell, we set our trap. The clearing Earl had chosen was perfect. A small meadow surrounded by tall pines, with a natural depression on one side where I could hide, and a large boulder on the other that would conceal Earl. We built a sizable fire in the center, its flames leaping high into the night sky, a beacon that no predator could miss. Melissa and Danielle sat by the fire, talking in voices loud enough to carry into the surrounding forest. Earl and I took our positions, each armed with one of the modified flare guns. The night was cold again, unnaturally so, our breath fogging in the air despite it being early October. "It knows," Earl whispered from his position. "It can sense the cold. That's its influence spreading through the forest." I gripped the flare gun tighter, my palms sweaty despite the chill. We waited, the minutes stretching into an hour, then 2. The fire burned lower. Melissa added more wood, sending a fresh wave of sparks spiraling into the night sky. Then we heard it, that now familiar wailing cry, closer than ever before. Melissa and Danielle huddled closer to the fire, their fear evident even from my position, but they didn't run. They were keeping their part of the plan. Movement caught my eye at the forest's edge, a pale shape slipping from tree to tree with unnatural grace. It was testing us, assessing the situation with more intelligence than I'd given it credit for. "Come on," I murmured under my breath. "Come into the open." As if hearing my challenge, the creature that had been Trevor stepped into the clearing. The transformation had progressed even further. He now stood nearly 7 feet tall, his body elongated and emaciated, skin stretched taut over visible bones. His fingers had become true claws, long and wickedly sharp. His face barely resembled anything human anymore, the jaw distended to accommodate teeth too numerous and large for a human mouth. "Friends," it said, Trevor's voice now overlaid with a rasping, inhuman tone. "I've been looking for you." Melissa and Danielle stood, backing toward the fire as the creature advanced. "Trevor," Melissa called, "if you're still in there somewhere, fight it. This isn't you?" The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Trevor is gone. There's only hunger now." It took another step forward. "Don't worry, it won't hurt for long, and then you'll understand. You'll join me in the feast." I waited, finger tense on the trigger, for it to come fully into the clearing. Earl had emphasized the importance of a clear shot. We couldn't risk merely wounding it. The creature stalked forward with predatory confidence, focused entirely on Melissa and Danielle. It didn't seem concerned about an ambush, either too hungry or too arrogant to consider the possibility. When it reached the center of the clearing, barely 10 feet from the women, I heard Earl's shout, "Now!" I rose from my hiding place and fired in one fluid motion. The phosphorus flare streaked across the clearing, a brilliant white-hot star that struck the creature square in the chest. Simultaneously, Earl's flare hit it from the opposite direction, catching it in the back. The Wendigo's shriek of agony tore through the night, a sound so terrible it seemed to physically hit me like a wave. The phosphorus burned with an intense white flame, spreading quickly across the creature's desiccated form. It thrashed and writhed, claws raking at its own burning flesh, trying in vain to extinguish the inexorable fire. "Get back!" Earl shouted, emerging from his position and rushing toward Melissa and Danielle. I did the same, putting myself between them and the burning monster. The creature that had once been our friend Trevor collapsed to its knees, still shrieking, its form blackening and crumbling under the relentless heat of the phosphorus. For just a moment, a brief, terrible moment, I thought I saw Trevor's face again, human and afraid, looking out through the flames with recognition and gratitude before it was consumed by fire. The shrieking stopped. The creature fell forward, now little more than charred remains that continued to burn with that strange white flame. We stood in silence, watching to ensure it didn't somehow rise again. "Is it over?" Danielle whispered after several minutes had passed. "Yes," Earl said with finality. "It's over." We spent that night in Earl's cabin, none of us willing to venture back into the forest until daylight, despite the threat being eliminated. In the morning, Earl guided us back to the Appalachian Trail, from where we were able to hike to a ranger station. We told a carefully edited version of events, that Trevor had wandered off during the night and fallen into a ravine, that we'd searched but been unable to reach him, that we'd encountered Earl who helped us find our way back to the trail. Search and rescue mounted an operation, but of course they never found Trevor's body, or any sign of him. The official report listed him as missing, presumed dead. The three of us who survived made a pact never to speak of what really happened. Who would believe us anyway? But we know the truth, and I've never set foot in October Mountain State Forest again. Some places are better left alone. Some hungers better left unfed. Sometimes, on cold October nights when the wind has a particular mournful quality, I think I hear that wailing cry again, and I wonder if we truly destroyed the Wendigo, or if it simply found a new host, a new hunger to feed. I pray it's just my imagination, but I keep Earl's modified flare gun, just in case. Some horrors once encountered leave you forever changed, forever vigilant. Perhaps that's the true curse of the Wendigo, not just those it consumes, but those it leaves behind, forever haunted by what they've witnessed, forever questioning what lurks in the darkness beyond the campfire's light. My name is Richard Garcia, and I am 37 years old. This happened in the remote forests of the Berkshire Mountains of western Massachusetts, specifically around the October Mountain State Forest. What was meant to be a weekend hiking trip to clear my head after my divorce turned into something I still have nightmares about, something that follows me even now, months later. I'd been an avid hiker before meeting Elaine. During our 8 years of marriage, my boots had gathered dust in the garage while we built what I thought was a life together. When she left me for her personal trainer, I fell into a pit of depression that consumed me for months. My therapist, Dr. Peterson, eventually suggested I reconnect with activities that once brought me joy, hence the solo camping trip. October Mountain had been my favorite spot in my 20s. Named for the vibrant autumn foliage that painted its slopes each fall, it was the largest state forest in Massachusetts, spanning over 16,000 acres of dense woodland. I remembered it as peaceful and rejuvenating. How wrong I was to return there. I arrived at the forest on a Friday afternoon in late September. The leaves were just beginning their transformation, splashes of orange and red among the green. I parked at the trailhead lot, which was surprisingly empty for such perfect hiking weather. I shouldered my pack, perhaps too heavy for someone who hadn't hiked in nearly a decade, and consulted my map. I'd planned a route that would take me deep into the forest to Finnerty Pond, where I would camp for 2 nights before looping back. The first few hours on the trail were exactly what I needed. The physical exertion burned away my lingering thoughts of Elaine, and the forest sounds, birds calling, leaves rustling, the occasional scurrying of small animals, soothed my frayed nerves. By late afternoon, I'd covered about 6 miles and decided to make camp in a small clearing near a stream, saving the final push to Finnerty Pond for the morning. As I set up my tent, I noticed how quickly the forest was darkening. The tall trees blocked much of the remaining daylight, creating premature twilight on the forest floor. I worked quickly to gather wood for a fire, the snap of twigs under my boots unnaturally loud in the growing silence. That was the first thing that struck me as odd. The silence. Forests are never truly quiet. There's always a background symphony of insects, birds, and rustling leaves. But as dusk settled over my campsite, these sounds faded until all I could hear was my own breathing and the soft gurgle of the stream. I told myself it was nothing. Probably just wildlife sensing a human presence and going quiet. I focused on getting my fire started, grateful for the warm glow it cast across the clearing. After heating a freeze-dried meal of beef stroganoff, which tasted better than it had any right to after my day of hiking, I leaned back against a fallen log and watched the flames dance. That's when I heard it. A whisper so faint I might have imagined it. Richard. I sat up straight, heart suddenly hammering in my chest. No one knew I was here. I hadn't told anyone my exact location, just that I was going camping in Western Mass, and I certainly hadn't encountered any other hikers who might have learned my name. "Hello?" I called out, instantly regretting it. My voice sounded weak and frightened even to my own ears. Nothing answered. The silence seemed to deepen, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I tried to rationalize it. The wind in the trees. My mind playing tricks after a long day. The stress of the divorce finally manifesting in auditory hallucinations. I added more wood to the fire and unrolled my sleeping bag inside my tent, determined to get some rest. Sleep came surprisingly easily, exhaustion from the hike overwhelming my unease. But I woke sometime in the deepest part of the night, the fire outside reduced to embers that cast barely enough light to see the tent walls. Something had pulled me from sleep. A sound, I thought, though I couldn't be sure. Then I heard it again. Multiple voices now, still whispering just outside my tent. He's awake. He hears us. Should have stayed away. Not welcome. Not welcome. I froze in my sleeping bag, fear paralyzing me. The voices were so close they could have been inside the tent with me. My rational mind screamed that this had to be other campers playing a cruel joke, but another part of me, a primal, instinctual part, knew this was something else entirely. I fumbled for my flashlight, fingers trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. When I finally clicked it on, the whispers stopped abruptly. I unzipped the tent just enough to shine the light outside, expecting, hoping, to see pranksters running away through the trees. There was nothing, just my dying fire and the dark forest beyond. But as I swept the beam around the perimeter of my campsite, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The ground around my tent was covered in footprints, dozens of them, all sizes, circling my tent like predators sizing up prey. Some looked human, others definitely weren't. I zipped the tent closed and huddled in my sleeping bag, flashlight clutched to my chest like a talisman. Sleep was impossible now. I lay awake until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the tent fabric, jumping at every sound, real or imagined, from the forest. When I finally worked up the courage to emerge from my tent, the footprints were gone. The ground showed no evidence of the nighttime visitors, not even my own tracks from setting up camp. I stood there in the morning mist, questioning my sanity. Had I dreamed it all? Was the stress of the divorce affecting me more than I'd realized? I decided to continue to Finnerty Pond as planned. Moving felt better than staying in that clearing, and I convinced myself that a good night's sleep by the pond would reset whatever had gone wrong in my head. The hike that day was strenuous, with several steep inclines that left me winded. The forest felt different in the daylight, less threatening but somehow more watchful. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, tracking my progress through the trees. Around midday, I stopped for lunch on a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the valley below. As I ate my energy bar and trail mix, I noticed a strange structure in a clearing about half a mile away, something that looked like a crude cabin or shelter, though it wasn't marked on my map. Curiosity piqued, I decided to investigate after reaching the pond and setting up camp. I arrived at Finnerty Pond in the late afternoon. It was a beautiful spot, the water clear and still, reflecting the surrounding trees like a mirror. Several established campsites dotted the shoreline, but again, I was alone. No other tents or hikers in sight. I chose a site on a small rise overlooking the pond and began setting up. That's when I noticed the carvings on the trees surrounding my campsite. At first glance, they looked like typical trail markers or the initials of past campers, but as I examined them more closely, I realized they were much more intricate. Symbols I didn't recognize, spirals and angular lines that seemed to form words in no language I knew. A sense of unease crept back into my chest, but I pushed it away. I was here to reconnect with nature and find peace, not spook myself over some old carvings. I focused on setting up my tent and gathering firewood before dusk fell. As I worked, I kept glancing at the pond. Something about its stillness bothered me. No ripples, no insects skimming the surface, no frogs jumping from the banks. It was as if the water itself was holding its breath, waiting. With my camp established, I decided to investigate the structure I'd spotted earlier. I had maybe 2 hours of daylight left, plenty of time to hike there and back. I took my backpack with some water and snacks, my flashlight and my phone, though there was no service this deep in the forest, and set off in the direction I'd seen the cabin. The path was overgrown, barely there, suggesting it hadn't been used in years. Thorny bushes tore at my pants, and low-hanging branches forced me to duck and weave as I pushed forward. The forest grew denser, the trees closer together, until it was almost like walking through a tunnel of vegetation. After about 40 minutes of hiking, I emerged into the clearing I'd spotted from above. In the center stood the structure, not quite a cabin, but something more primitive. It appeared to be made of roughly hewn logs and branches, with a roof of layered pine boughs. The door was a crude opening, covered by what looked like an animal hide. Curiosity overcame caution, and I approached slowly, calling out to see if anyone was inside. When no answer came, I pushed aside the hide and peered into the dimness beyond. The interior was a single room, dirt-floored and sparse. A stone circle in the center held the ashes of old fires. Around the walls, hung on wooden pegs, were items that made my skin crawl. Animal skulls, mostly deer and small mammals, but also what looked disturbingly like human jawbones. Bundles of dried herbs and feathers dangled from the ceiling beams. In one corner, a bed of furs lay rumpled as if recently used, but it was the far wall that held my attention. It was covered in crude drawings made with what looked like charcoal and red ochre. They depicted human figures fleeing from something tall and thin with too many limbs, and in the center of the wall, pinned with a rusted knife, was a sheet of yellowed paper covered in cramped handwriting. I crossed the room and carefully removed the knife, taking the paper in trembling hands. The handwriting was difficult to make out, faded and blotched with what might have been water damage or blood. They come at night, always at night. The Whisperers. They followed me from the pond. I thought I'd escaped them, but they found me. They always find you if you hear them. They speak your name and then you belong to them. I've been hiding here for 3 days, but I know they're outside now. I can hear them scratching at the walls, whispering my name, telling me what they'll do when they get in. If anyone finds this, stay away from Finnerty Pond after dark. Don't listen if something calls your name. Run. Run as fast as... The note ended abruptly, the pen dragging into a long, jagged line that led off the page. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the paper. A cold sweat had broken out across my body despite the cool temperature in the shelter. Part of me wanted to dismiss this as the ravings of a mentally ill person or an elaborate hoax to scare hikers, but after last night's whispers... A sudden sound outside made me jump, a twig snapping too close to the shelter. I stuffed the note into my pocket and moved cautiously to the doorway, peering out through the gap between the hide and the frame. Nothing was visible in the clearing, but the quality of light had changed. The sun was setting faster than I'd anticipated, long shadows stretching across the ground like grasping fingers. I needed to get back to my campsite before full dark. I slipped out of the shelter and began retracing my steps, moving as quickly as the rough trail would allow. But something was wrong. The path didn't look the same as it had on my way in. The trees seemed different, the underbrush thicker. Had I taken a wrong turn? I pulled out my phone to check the compass app, but the screen went black as soon as I unlocked it. The battery suddenly dead despite having been at 70% minutes before. My heart rate accelerated as panic began to set in. I knew the general direction of the pond, downhill and east, so I oriented myself as best I could and pressed on. The forest grew darker by the minute, the undergrowth thicker, slowing my progress to a frustrating crawl. I should have reached the pond by now. Had I veered off course? The trees all looked the same in the fading light, and without my phone or compass, I had only my increasingly unreliable sense of direction to guide me. That's when I noticed the symbols again, carved into the trees I was passing, the same intricate patterns I'd seen around my campsite. I was going in circles. Night fell completely as this realization hit me. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam pathetically small against the vast blackness of the forest. I needed to find shelter. Stumbling around in the dark would only get me more lost or injured. I spotted a large fallen tree with a raised root system that created a small sheltered space. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. I crawled underneath, using my emergency blanket to create a makeshift barrier against the night air, which had grown, suddenly, unnaturally cold. As I huddled there, the forest went silent again, that same unnatural quiet I'd experienced the previous night. And then, just as before, came the whispers. "Richard. We see you, Richard." Hiding won't help. We found the last one, too. They came from all around me, some distant, others so close it felt like lips were pressed against my ear. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The voices seemed to be inside my head now. "Join us, Richard," like the others. "Your campsite is empty now. We took your things. We took the one before you too, the one who wrote the warning." My blood turned to ice. They knew about the note. How could they know unless... A twig snapped nearby, and my flashlight beam caught movement, a figure darting between trees. I swung the light back, but whatever it was had vanished. Another movement to my right. I turned again, catching just a glimpse of something pale and elongated slipping behind a thick trunk. They were circling me, just as the footprints had circled my tent. In that moment, I made a decision born of pure terror. I ran. I abandoned my makeshift shelter and bolted in what I hoped was the direction of the pond, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but primal fear kept me moving. Behind me, I heard them giving chase, not just footsteps but a strange scuttling sound, like too many limbs moving at unnatural angles. The whispers grew to hisses, then to snarls. Running makes it worse, Richard. We like when they run. More fun this way. I burst through a thicket and suddenly found myself at the edge of Finnerty Pond, the water black and still under the night sky. My campsite was visible on the rise about 100 yards to my left. Relief flooded through me. I wasn't as lost as I'd feared. I sprinted toward my tent, hoping to grab my things and continue running until I reached civilization. But as I approached, I saw that something was wrong. My tent was in tatters, the fabric shredded as if by claws or knives. My sleeping bag had been dragged outside and torn apart, the stuffing scattered across the ground. My backpack was missing entirely. I skidded to a stop, staring in horror at the destruction. In the beam of my flashlight, I noticed something else. New symbols carved freshly into the trees around my ruined campsite, the exposed wood still pale and raw. The sounds of pursuit had stopped as suddenly as they'd begun. The forest was silent again, but I could feel eyes watching me from the darkness beyond my light's reach. They had herded me here. This was where they wanted me to be. As I stood frozen with indecision, the surface of the pond began to move. Not with ripples or waves, but with something rising from below. Something large. The black water parted, and a figure emerged, water cascading from its form. In my flashlight beam, I could see it was humanoid but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its skin was a pale, bloodless white, and where its face should have been was a blank expanse of flesh with only a mouth that opened far too wide, lined with needle-like teeth. It spoke, not in whispers now, but in a voice like stones grinding together. "Richard Garcia, you heard us call. Now you belong to the Whisperers of October Mountain." From the woods around me came more figures, emerging from between the trees. Similar creatures, some smaller, some larger, all with that same terrible mouthless face. Among them walked something else, something that had once been human. I recognized the tattered remains of outdoor clothing, the hiking boots. The face was sunken and gray, the eyes milky white, but there was enough left to see that this had been a man, perhaps the author of the note I'd found. They began to close in from all sides, backing me toward the water where the tall creature still stood partially submerged. I was trapped between them and the pond with nowhere to run. In desperation, I swung my backpack at the nearest creature, momentarily forcing it back. Then I made a split-second decision and ran. Not away from the pond, which was impossible now, but along its shore, parallel to the water. If I could circle the pond, maybe I could find another trail out of this nightmare. I ran as I'd never run before, legs pumping, lungs burning. Behind me, the creatures gave chase, their movements unnaturally fast and fluid. The one from the pond emerged fully onto land, its long limbs eating up the distance between us with terrifying speed. As I rounded a bend in the shoreline, my flashlight beam caught something that gave me a surge of hope. A small wooden structure that I recognized as one of the emergency shelters marked on my map. If I could reach it, maybe I could barricade myself inside until daylight. I put on a final burst of speed, practically throwing myself at the shelter's door. It wasn't locked, these shelters never were, and I tumbled inside, slamming the door behind me and fumbling for the simple wooden bar that would secure it. The creatures hit the door seconds later, the impact making the entire structure shudder. The wood creaked and groaned under their assault, the single window shuddered but rattling in its frame. I backed against the far wall, watching in horror as the bar across the door began to splinter. In the dim beam of my failing flashlight, I noticed something on the small table in the center of the one-room shelter, a lantern and matches. With shaking hands, I managed to light it, the warm glow filling the space and strengthening my resolve. Fire. They had avoided my campfire the previous night, staying just beyond its light. As if confirming my theory, the pounding on the door lessened slightly when the lantern flared to life. I quickly searched the shelter for anything else that might help me. There was a small wood stove in one corner with a stack of logs beside it. I lit a fire in the stove as well, grateful for the extra light and warmth. A small first aid kit hung on one wall, and beside it, a shelf held emergency supplies, including, to my immense relief, a flare gun with 3 flares. It wouldn't do much against these creatures, but it was better than nothing. The assault on the door continued, but with less intensity. I could hear them moving around the shelter, testing the walls, the shuttered window, the roof. The whispers started again, trying to work their way into my mind. The light won't last, Richard. Wood burns to ash. Then we'll have you. I tried to block out their voices, focusing instead on my next move. I couldn't stay here forever. Eventually, the firewood would run out, or they would find a way in. I needed a plan. I remembered something from the note. They come at night, always at night. If I could hold out until dawn, maybe they would retreat. It was a slim hope, but the only one I had. I checked my watch just after 10 p.m., at least 8 hours until sunrise. Could the shelter hold that long? Could I? The creatures seemed to sense my thoughts as the pounding on the walls intensified again. The entire structure groaned under their assault. A crack appeared in one wall, and through it, I caught a glimpse of a long, pale finger working its way inside, the nail black and sharp as a talon. I loaded the flare gun and fired at the crack. The flare struck the intruding digit directly, and a screech of pain tore through the night, a sound so high-pitched and inhuman it made my ears ring. The finger withdrew, and for a moment, the assault on the shelter ceased. I used the respite to reinforce the door and walls as best I could, dragging the small table against the door and stuffing strips torn from the emergency blanket into the crack where the creature had tried to enter. It wouldn't hold them off forever, but it might buy me some time. The attack resumed with renewed fury, the creatures seemingly enraged by the injury to one of their own. The shelter shook with each impact, dust and splinters raining down from the ceiling. I heard claws or talons scraping at the roof, searching for a way in, and then, abruptly, everything stopped. The pounding ceased, the scratching went silent, and even the whispers died away. I stood frozen in the center of the shelter, flare gun clutched in my trembling hand, waiting for whatever would come next. A new sound reached my ears. A low, rhythmic chanting from multiple throats in a language I didn't recognize. It seemed to be coming from the direction of my ruined campsite. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as the chanting grew louder, more intense. Through the cracks in the shelter walls, I saw light. Not the warm yellow of fire, but a sickly green glow that pulsed in time with the chanting. Whatever ritual the creatures were performing, I knew instinctively it wasn't good for me. The temperature inside the shelter plummeted suddenly, my breath fogging in front of my face. The lantern flame flickered and dimmed, though there was no draft. The fire in the wood stove, which had been crackling healthily moments before, dwindled to embers despite the fresh log I'd added. They were somehow suppressing the fire, removing my only protection. As the light faded, the wall opposite the door began to bulge inward, the wood bending in a way that should have been impossible. It stretched like something organic, forming a shape that resembled a face pressing through from the outside. A face with that same terrible toothless maw I'd seen on the creature from the pond. I fired my second flare directly at the protruding face. It struck true, and the face retreated with another unearthly shriek. The wall snapped back to its normal shape, but now bore a charred, smoking hole where the flare had burned through. Through this hole I could see them gathered outside, at least a dozen of the pale, elongated creatures, their blank faces turned toward the shelter. Among them stood the tall one from the pond, seeming to direct their efforts. Behind them, at the edge of my ruined campsite, a green fire burned, casting that sickly light across the scene. They were preparing for something. The chanting grew more frenzied, the green fire flaring higher. I had one flare left and no idea how long I could keep them at bay once the lantern and stove fire died completely. In desperation, I searched the shelter again, looking for anything I might have missed. Under the small cot in the corner, I found an old metal box. Inside was a journal, similar to the note I'd found in the forest shelter, but more extensive. I flipped through it quickly, scanning for anything that might help me. The journal belonged to a forest ranger named Thomas Blackwood, who had been investigating disappearances in the October Mountain Forest dating back to the 1800s. His entries detailed a local legend about the Whisperers, or Night Walkers, entities that had been worshipped by a splinter group of settlers who practiced dark rituals at Finnerty Pond. According to Blackwood, these creatures could only physically manifest after dark and were repelled by fire and certain symbols he had discovered carved into the oldest trees in the forest. The final entries described how Blackwood had realized too late that he was being stalked by the Whisperers. He had taken refuge in this very shelter, recording his experiences as they laid siege to his sanctuary. The last entry was dated 5 years ago and ended mid-sentence, just as the note in the forest shelter had. But most importantly, Blackwood had drawn the protective symbols throughout his journal, the same angular, spiral patterns I had seen carved into the trees, but with subtle differences. These were not the Whisperers' markings, but wards against them, corrupted over time as the creatures claimed more of the forest. With shaking hands, I tore out a page containing the clearest drawing of the protective symbol. Using a charred stick from the wood stove, I began recreating it on the inside walls of the shelter, floor to ceiling, on every available surface. Outside, the creatures seemed to sense what I was doing. Their chanting became more urgent, the assault on the shelter resuming with greater intensity. The roof began to tear away in strips as claws ripped through the aging wood. I worked faster, completing symbol after symbol even as the shelter disintegrated around me. The lantern sputtered and died. The stove fire had been reduced to the faintest glow. My flashlight battery was nearly exhausted, the beam barely visible. But I had covered nearly every surface with Blackwood's symbols, and as I completed the last one on the door itself, something extraordinary happened. The symbols began to glow, not green like the creature's fire, but a deep, pulsing blue that grew brighter with each passing second. Outside, the Whisperers' chanting turned to wails of what sounded like pain or anger. Through the hole in the wall, I saw them retreating from the shelter, their elongated limbs thrashing in apparent agony as the blue light spilled outside. The tall one from the pond stood its ground longer than the others, that terrible mouth opening wide to emit a sound like tearing metal. It locked its eyeless face on me through the hole and spoke one final time. "This forest is ours, Richard Garcia. We have marked you. We will find you wherever you go now. When you sleep, you will hear our whispers. When you walk in darkness, we will be watching. Run if you want, hide if you can, but you are ours now." Then it too retreated, melting into the forest shadows as the blue light from the symbols pushed outward. The green fire at my campsite extinguished with a sound like a scream. I remained in the shelter, surrounded by the protective glow of Blackwood's symbols, until the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. As sunlight touched the trees, the blue glow faded, the symbols returning to their charred black appearance on the shelter walls. When I was certain the creatures were gone, I emerged from the damaged shelter into the morning light. My campsite remained in ruins, but there was no sign of the Whisperers or their ritual. Even the footprints they must have left in the soft earth around the shelter were absent, as if they had never existed. I didn't waste time. I gathered what few supplies I could salvage and began hiking back toward the trailhead, moving as quickly as the rough terrain would allow. I didn't stop to rest, didn't dare pause even for water, driven by the primal need to put as much distance as possible between myself and Finnerty Pond. It should have taken me a full day to hike back to my car, but somehow I made it by noon. Perhaps fear gave me speed, or perhaps, and this thought chills me even now, The forest itself seemed to shift around me, the trails straightening, the distance compressing, as if it wanted me gone as badly as I wanted to leave. I drove straight home, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I told no one what had happened. Who would believe me? I spent the next week in a state of near-constant panic, jumping at shadows, sleeping with every light in my apartment blazing. But the worst part was the whispers. Just as the tall creature had promised, they found me in my dreams, those same voices calling my name, telling me I belonged to them, that they would come for me when the time was right. I would wake, gasping, certain that pale figures stood at the foot of my bed, only to find nothing when I turned on the light. After the third night of this torment, I returned to Blackwood's journal, which I had taken from the shelter. I spent days studying it, learning everything the ranger had discovered about the Whisperers. According to his research, they couldn't venture far from their forest home, but they could extend their influence through dreams to those they had marked. Blackwood had been searching for a way to break this connection when he disappeared. But in his earlier entries, he mentioned consulting with a local historian in Pittsfield named Marion Crane, who had studied the original settler group that worshipped the Whisperers. It took some searching, but I found that Crane was still alive. Elderly now, but still sharp-minded. When I called her and mentioned Blackwood and the Whisperers, she agreed to meet me immediately. Marion lived in a small house filled with books and artifacts relating to the history of the Berkshires. When I arrived, she took one look at me, at the dark circles under my eyes, my twitchy movements, the way I startled at every sound, and nodded grimly. "They've marked you," she said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Just like Thomas. She listened to my story without interruption, without the skepticism I had feared. When I finished, she sighed heavily and retrieved an old leather-bound book from a locked cabinet. "The Whisperers are ancient," she explained, turning yellowed pages filled with text and illustrations. "They were here long before European settlers arrived. The Mohican people knew to avoid certain parts of the forest, especially Finnerty Pond, which they called the place of bad dreams. When colonists came, most heeded the warnings of the native people, but a small group, led by a man named Ezekiel Finnerty, became fascinated by the legends." She showed me illustrations depicting ritual sites similar to what I had seen. The green fire, the symbols carved into trees. According to Marion, Finnerty and his followers believed they could harness the power of the Whisperers through human sacrifice. They would lure travelers to the pond and offer them to the entities in exchange for various boons: good harvests, protection from disease, longevity. "But they miscalculated," Marion continued. "The Whisperers can't be controlled. They used Finnerty and his people, allowed them to think they were in charge of the relationship, and when they had no more use for them..." She turned to an illustration showing pale, elongated figures emerging from a pond, surrounding a group of terrified humans. The next page showed only the creatures, standing among empty clothes. They took them all, every member of Finnerty's group, absorbed them, changed them. The few who escaped went mad, plagued by whispers that followed them wherever they went. My blood ran cold as I recognized my own experience in her words. Is there a way to break the connection? To stop the dreams? Marion was quiet for a long moment. Thomas was looking for the same answer. He believed the protective symbols could shield a person temporarily, but not forever. Not unless... She hesitated, then continued reluctantly. "According to the stories, there's only one permanent solution. The Whisperers maintain their connection to this world through anchors, physical objects hidden throughout the forest that bind them here. Thomas believed if these anchors were destroyed, the Whisperers would be forced back to whatever dimension they originally came from, breaking any connection to those they had marked." "What are these anchors? Where would I find them?" I asked desperately. "That's what Thomas went back to discover," she said softly. "He never returned." I left Marion's house with copies of the protective symbols and what little information she had about the possible locations of the anchors. According to her research, there would be 7 anchors, corresponding to 7 sites where Finnerty's group had performed their rituals. One was certainly at Finnerty Pond itself. The others would be scattered throughout the forest, likely in the most remote areas. I spent weeks preparing. I couldn't face the forest again as I was, sleep-deprived, terrified, jumping at shadows. I trained, getting back into hiking shape. I studied maps of October Mountain State Forest until I knew every trail, every landmark. I practiced drawing the protective symbols until I could recreate them perfectly from memory. And all the while, the whispers continued in my dreams, growing more threatening, more enticing by turns. Sometimes they showed me visions of what awaited me if I returned to the forest, my body, empty-eyed and slack, walking among them as their newest recruit, like the transformed hiker I had seen. Other times, they promised power, knowledge, experiences no human had ever known, if only I would come to them willingly. I almost broke several times. Twice I found myself in my car, halfway to October Mountain before coming to my senses. Once I woke, standing in my kitchen, a knife in my hand, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. But 3 months after my encounter, I was ready. I returned to October Mountain on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, but also, according to Marion's research, when the Whisperers would be at their strongest and most vulnerable. Their anchors would be fully materialized on this night, making them possible to destroy, but the creatures themselves would be at the height of their power. I won't detail everything that happened during those 3 terrifying days in the winter forest. Some memories are too painful, too horrific to relive, even now. I lost 2 fingers on my left hand. My back bears scars from claws that should not exist in our reality, and the things I saw, the transformations, the rituals, the glimpses into whatever dark dimension the Whisperers call home, have left wounds on my psyche that will never fully heal. But I found the anchors, 7 objects that looked like ordinary stones until touched, when they revealed their true nature as pulsing, organic things that felt alive under my fingers. I destroyed them one by one, using fire and the ritual Marion had pieced together from fragmentary accounts. The final anchor was at Finnerty Pond itself, beneath the black waters where I had first seen the tall creature emerge. Destroying it nearly cost me my life as the Whisperers made their final, desperate assault. The water of the pond rose up like a living thing, forming tendrils that sought to drag me under. The forest itself seemed to turn against me, trees bending unnaturally, roots erupting from the ground to snare my ankles. But as the last anchor crumbled to ash in the ritual fire, a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison tore through the night. The Whisperers, visible now in their full terrifying forms, began to distort and stretch, as if being pulled back to some distant point. Their bodies elongated, thinned, and then simply unraveled, like threads being pulled from a tapestry. The tall one was the last to go. As it disintegrated, it fixed its eyeless face on me one final time. "We will return, Richard Garcia," it said, its voice already fading, distant. "The anchors can be remade, the doorway reopened, and when we come again, we will remember you." Then it was gone, along with all the others, leaving only an unnatural silence in the winter forest. I made my way back to civilization, half frozen and delirious from blood loss and exhaustion. The hospital staff assumed I had been the victim of an animal attack, and I didn't correct them. Who would believe the truth? The whispers stopped after that night. My dreams, while still troubled by memories of what I had experienced, were no longer invaded by those terrible voices promising horrors to come. According to Marion Crane, the Whisperers were banished back to their own dimension, at least for now. The connection was broken, but sometimes on the edge of sleep, I think I hear something. Not quite a whisper, but a distant echo, like a voice calling from across a vast chasm. And I wonder if they truly are gone, or simply waiting, gathering strength for their return. I haven't gone back to October Mountain. I never will. But I've sent anonymous warnings to the forestry department, to hiking groups, to anyone who might listen. Stay away from Finnerty Pond after dark. Don't camp within a mile of its shores. And most importantly, if you hear something whisper your name in the forest, run. Don't look back, don't hesitate, just run. Because the whispers remember those who have heard them, and one day they'll find a way back to our world. I know because they promised they would, and in my heart, I know it's true. My name is Richard Garcia, and this is my warning to you. My name is Jessica Davis, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Berkshire Mountains of western Massachusetts last October, when the autumn foliage was at its most vibrant and deceptively beautiful. I've always considered myself an experienced hiker. Growing up near the mountains, I spent countless weekends exploring trails and camping under the stars. After my divorce was finalized, I decided to take a solo backpacking trip to clear my head and reconnect with the outdoors that had always brought me comfort. October Cabin, an isolated rental property near Mount Greylock, seemed perfect. Remote enough to escape my problems, but with basic amenities to make a week-long stay comfortable. The cabin wasn't listed on the major vacation rental sites. I found it on a forum for hikers, posted by someone named Eleanor Thorne, who claimed to be the caretaker. The nightly rate was suspiciously low, but the photos showed a charming rustic cabin surrounded by ancient pines. The isolation appealed to me. No neighbors, no cell service, just wilderness and silence. I should have questioned why it was available on such short notice during peak foliage season. The drive from Boston took longer than expected. The GPS guided me onto progressively narrower roads until I was crawling along a rutted dirt path that barely deserved to be called a road. As my Subaru jolted over roots and rocks, the forest seemed to close in around me. The tall pines blocked much of the afternoon sunlight, casting the forest floor in shifting shadows. When I finally arrived at the cabin, the sun was already dipping behind the mountains. The temperature dropped rapidly as I unloaded my gear from the car. The cabin matched the photos, a small wooden structure with a modest porch and smoke curling from the chimney. Wait. Smoke from the chimney. I froze beside my car, the hair on my arms rising. Someone was inside. I hesitated, weighing my options. I could leave, but darkness was falling and I wasn't confident I could navigate the treacherous access road at night. As I deliberated, the cabin door opened. A thin, elderly woman stood in the doorway, her silhouette backlit by a warm glow from inside. She raised her hand in greeting. "You must be Jessica," she called. Her voice was surprisingly strong for someone who appeared so frail. "I'm Eleanor. I was beginning to worry you'd gotten lost." Relief washed over me. Eleanor Thorne, the caretaker I'd corresponded with. I approached and introduced myself properly. "I hope you don't mind that I started a fire," she said, gesturing to the hearth inside. "October nights get cold up here, especially when you're not used to the mountain air." The cabin was warm and cozy inside, with a small living area dominated by a stone fireplace, a compact kitchen, and a door that presumably led to the bedroom. Rustic, but clean. The walls were decorated with faded photographs of the surrounding wilderness and a few pressed flowers in frames. "It's perfect," I said, admiring the simplicity. Eleanor nodded approvingly. "The supplies you requested are in the kitchen. Firewood is stacked on the back porch. The bathroom is basic but functional. Water comes from the well. It's clean, but it has a mineral taste some folks aren't fond of." She gave me a brief tour, showing me how to operate the propane stove and where to find extra blankets. As she moved around the cabin, I noticed she walked with a slight limp, favoring her left leg. "The hiking trails around here aren't on any official maps," she explained, unfolding a hand-drawn map on the kitchen table. "Too many tourists would ruin the place, but this will show you the best routes." I studied the map, impressed by its detail. Eleanor had marked several trails with notes about difficulty and landmarks to watch for. "This one is particularly beautiful," she said, tracing a path with her bony finger. "Takes you up to Widow's Peak. Best view in the Berkshires." She tapped another trail, her expression changing subtly. "But avoid this area, especially after dark. Old mining territory. Dangerous." I nodded, making mental notes of her recommendations. "Well, I should leave you to settle in," Eleanor said, moving toward the door. "I live just down the mountain if you need anything. No phone service up here, as you know, but there's an old CB radio in the kitchen cabinet for emergencies. Channel 16. Before leaving, she paused at the door and turned back. "One last thing. The forest can play tricks on your mind at night. If you hear voices or see lights among the trees, best to stay inside, probably just hikers passing through. But you never know." With that cryptic warning, she departed, leaving me alone in the suddenly quiet cabin. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind sighed through the pines, a sound like distant whispers. I unpacked my supplies and prepared a simple dinner, enjoying the silence after months of city noise. After eating, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching darkness consume the forest. Stars appeared overhead, more brilliant than I'd seen in years. The peace was exactly what I needed, until I heard the singing. It started so faintly, I thought it was just the wind at first. A soft, melodic humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A woman's voice, high and clear, singing words I couldn't quite make out. I strained to listen, setting my cup down and walking to the edge of the porch. The singing stopped abruptly. "Hello?" I called into the darkness. "Is someone there?" No response, just the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I told myself it was just my imagination, or perhaps sound carrying from a distant hiker. Eleanor had mentioned others might pass through the area. I returned to my tea, but the peaceful feeling had evaporated. That night, I slept fitfully. The bed was comfortable enough, but the darkness was absolute, the kind of impenetrable blackness that makes you question whether your eyes are open or closed. My dreams were uneasy, fragmented images of running through endless trees, pursued by something I couldn't see but could feel, gaining on me. I woke at dawn, relieved to see light filtering through the curtains. After breakfast, I decided to explore the area, choosing one of the trails Eleanor had recommended. The forest was magnificent in the morning light. Golden and crimson leaves carpeted the ground, and shafts of sunlight penetrated the canopy, creating pools of warm light. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of pine and decay, the distinct autumn smell that speaks of both life and its inevitable end. I hiked for hours, following Eleanor's map. The trail gradually ascended, becoming steeper as it wound around the mountain. By midday, I reached a clearing that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon, a patchwork of autumn colors. As I sat eating lunch, I noticed something strange. A thin column of smoke rose from among the trees to the north in the direction Eleanor had warned me against. The old mining territory. I squinted, trying to determine if it was a campfire or something else, but it was too distant to tell. My curiosity got the better of me. After finishing my lunch, I decided to investigate, marking my position carefully on the map before leaving the trail. I knew the risks of going off trail, but I was confident in my navigation skills. The forest grew denser as I headed north. The underbrush was thicker here, grabbing at my ankles and slowing my progress. The joyful singing of birds that had accompanied my morning hike was absent, the forest unnaturally quiet. After about an hour of difficult hiking, I came upon an odd arrangement of stones, a rough circle about 6 feet in diameter. In the center, the remnants of a recent fire smoldered, wisps of smoke still rising. Surrounding the fire pit were small bundles of twigs bound with red thread, forming strange symbols on the ground. It looked ritualistic, and I felt a prickle of unease. Someone had been here recently. I scanned the surrounding trees but saw no one. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye, A flash of white among the trees. I squinted, trying to make it out. It looked like a figure moving away from me, dressed in pale clothing. "Hello," I called. "I don't mean to intrude." The figure paused but didn't turn. Then it continued moving away, disappearing into the dense foliage. "Wait!" I started after it, pushing through the underbrush. But I quickly lost sight of whoever or whatever it was. After a few minutes of fruitless pursuit, I realized I'd made a rookie mistake. In my haste to follow the figure, I'd lost track of my direction. I pulled out my compass, relieved to find I could still orient myself, but when I checked Eleanor's map, I realized I was in the area she had specifically warned me to avoid, the old mining territory. A sense of unease settled over me. The forest seemed different here, the trees more twisted, the undergrowth sparser, the ground disturbed in places as if something had been digging. I noticed small holes in the earth, too perfectly round to be natural. I needed to get back to marked trails. Using my compass, I began heading south, toward where I thought the main trail should be. The going was difficult. The terrain became increasingly rocky with sudden drop-offs and hidden crevices that forced me to move carefully. As the afternoon wore on, the light began to fade. Low clouds rolled in, obscuring the sun and bringing with them a thin, clinging mist that reduced visibility. I checked my watch, 4:30 p.m. I had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. Then I heard it again. The singing. The same haunting melody I'd heard the night before, but closer now. It seemed to come from ahead of me. Against my better judgment, I moved toward it. The singing led me to a small clearing where the mist swirled more thickly. In the center stood what appeared to be the ruins of a small stone structure, perhaps a miner's cabin or storage shed. Only the foundation and portions of 2 walls remained. The singing stopped as I entered the clearing. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding muffled in the mist. "Is someone here? I'm a bit turned around and could use some help." No response. I approached the ruins cautiously. Among the fallen stones, I found rusted metal tools, pickaxes and shovels, confirming this had been a mining operation. But there was something else. Something that made my skin crawl. Scratches in the remaining wall. 5 parallel lines repeated over and over like claw marks. As I examined them, I noticed a small opening in the ground beside the ruins. The entrance to a mine shaft, partially collapsed but still accessible. A cold draft emanated from it, carrying a musty, metallic odor. I had no intention of exploring an abandoned mine shaft, but as I turned to leave, I heard something from within it. A soft whimpering, like a child in distress. "Is someone down there?" I called, kneeling by the opening. "Are you hurt?" The whimpering continued, now sounding more desperate. Every instinct told me to walk away, to return to the cabin before darkness fell completely. But if someone was trapped or injured... I pulled out my flashlight and shone it into the opening. The beam illuminated rough-hewn stone steps descending into darkness. The whimpering came again, definitely from below. "I'm coming down," I called. "Stay where you are." Heart pounding, I began to descend the steps, one hand against the damp wall for balance. The air grew colder with each step, the smell of minerals and decay stronger. My flashlight beam bounced off the narrow walls, creating disorienting shadows. The steps ended in a small chamber with several tunnels branching off in different directions. Mining carts on rusted tracks disappeared into the darkness. The walls glittered faintly where the light struck them. Quartz or mica in the rock. "Hello?" I called again. "Where are you?" The whimpering had stopped. Instead, there was only silence, broken by the occasional drip of water and something else. A soft scratching sound from one of the tunnels. I directed my light toward it. The beam reflected off 2 points in the darkness. Eyes watching me from within the tunnel. Not human eyes. They were too low to the ground, too red in reflection. "Who's there?" My voice shook. The eyes blinked and vanished. The scratching grew louder, like claws on stone, moving toward me. I backed toward the steps, my flashlight beam slashing wildly across the chamber. For an instant, it illuminated something at the edge of the tunnel. A pale, emaciated figure on all fours, hairless with a head too large for its body. Its skin was stretched tight over an inhuman bone structure. I ran. Scrambling up the steps, I burst out of the mine entrance into the gathering dusk. The mist had thickened into a light rain, and the forest was dark with approaching night. Terrified, I oriented myself with my compass and began running south, no longer concerned with finding the trail, only with putting distance between myself and whatever I'd seen in the mine. I ran until my lungs burned, stumbling over roots and rocks. Branches whipped at my face. Once I fell, sliding down a muddy slope and slamming into a tree. Pain shot through my shoulder, but fear drove me back to my feet. Darkness fell completely, forcing me to slow my pace. My flashlight provided the only illumination, and its beam seemed feeble against the profound darkness of the forest. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the crack of branches, sent spikes of adrenaline through me. Was I being followed? I couldn't tell. Several times I thought I heard the scratching again, just at the edge of perception. Once I spun around, certain I'd seen movement in my peripheral vision, but the light revealed only trees and mist. By some miracle, I stumbled onto a trail. Not the one I'd started on, but a clear path that I recognized from Eleanor's map. It would lead back toward the cabin, though from a different approach than I'd planned. The cabin. I needed to get back, pack my things, and leave. Whatever was happening in these woods, I wanted no part of it. As I hurried along the trail, the rain intensified, soaking through my jacket. The temperature dropped further, and my breath formed clouds in the beam of my flashlight. My teeth chattered, as much from fear as from cold. Then, through the trees ahead, I saw a welcome sight: lights. The cabin's windows glowed warmly in the darkness. Relief flooded through me as I approached. I'd made it back. I would gather my belongings, get in my car, and drive away from this place, treacherous road or not. But as I drew closer, I realized something was wrong. The lights weren't coming from the cabin's windows. They were among the trees surrounding it. Dozens of small, flickering lights like candles, arranged in a wide circle around the property. I slowed, then stopped at the edge of the clearing. The cabin itself was dark. In the rain and gloom, I could just make out figures moving among the trees, carrying the lights. Their movements were odd, jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by unskilled hands. I stood frozen, unsure what to do. I couldn't approach the cabin, but I couldn't remain in the forest all night. I needed shelter, warmth. As I deliberated, one of the lights broke from the circle and began moving in my direction. Someone was coming toward me. I ducked behind a large tree, holding my breath as the light drew closer. Through the curtain of rain, I could make out a small figure carrying a lantern. A woman, her hair plastered to her skull by the rain, her clothes sodden. It was Eleanor. Relief coursed through me. "Eleanor," I called, stepping out from behind the tree. She stopped, raising her lantern. Her face, illuminated from below, looked ghostly, her eyes wide with what seemed like fear or surprise. "Jessica, what are you doing out here in the dark?" "I got lost," I stammered, moving toward her. "What's happening at the cabin? Who are all those people?" She glanced back toward the lights. "People? There's no one there but me." Her voice was strained. "But the lights," I began. "Just some lanterns I put out," she interrupted, "to guide me home in the dark. Come, you must be freezing. Let's get you inside." She turned and began walking toward the cabin. I followed hesitantly, confused by what I'd seen. As we approached, I realized she was right. There were no people, just lanterns hanging from tree branches, swaying in the wind. My fear-addled mind had transformed them into moving figures. The cabin was dark because the power had gone out, not unusual during storms. Eleanor explained as she unlocked the door. Inside, she lit an oil lamp and stoked the embers in the fireplace, adding logs until a cheerful blaze illuminated the room. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, helping me out of my wet jacket. "What happened out there?" I told her everything. The stone circle, the ruins, the mine shaft, and what I'd seen inside it. As I spoke, her expression grew increasingly grave. "You went into Blackwood Mine?" she asked when I finished. Her voice was barely audible over the crackling fire. I nodded. There was a sound, like someone in trouble. Eleanor sank into a chair, her face ashen. "That's how it lures people in." "What do you mean? What lures people in?" She looked at me for a long moment as if deciding something. Then she rolled up her left pant leg, revealing what I had assumed was a limp. Her leg ended in a stump just below the knee, the old wound long healed but still horrific to behold. "This is what I got for answering those cries for help 30 years ago," she said quietly. I stared, speechless. "They called it the Blackwood Hunger in the old days," she continued, rolling her pant leg back down. "The miners awoke something when they dug too deep, something that had been sleeping in the mountain for centuries. It feeds rarely, but when it does—" "You can't be serious," I said, though the image of what I'd seen in the mine flashed vividly in my mind. "The locals know to stay away. We try to keep outsiders from finding the place, but sometimes—" She shook her head. "It sings, it cries, it makes sounds that draw you in. I was young, like you. I heard a baby crying." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. "Why would you rent a cabin so close to that place?" Eleanor's eyes met mine, sad and resigned. "I don't own this cabin, Jessica. There was no rental listing, no forum post." My blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about? We corresponded. You took my payment." "I've lived alone in these mountains since my encounter. I look after the old properties, keep an eye on the mine. When I found you here yesterday, I played along. Thought maybe I could keep you safe, steer you away from danger." She sighed heavily. "But it's already marked you. It knows your scent now." "This is insane," I whispered, rising from my chair. "I'm leaving. Now." "You can try," Eleanor said, making no move to stop me. "But the roads will be washed out from the rain, and it's waiting in the woods." As if in response to her words, a sound came from outside, the scratching again, this time against the cabin wall. Then the singing began, a woman's voice, high and sweet, just outside the window. Eleanor's face drained of color. "It's never come this close to a dwelling before." I moved to the window, pulling back the curtain a fraction. Through the rain-streaked glass, I saw nothing but darkness. The scratching moved around the cabin, followed by a thump on the porch. Something was testing the door, the knob rattling slightly. "The CB radio," I said, remembering Eleanor's earlier mention. "We can call for help." She shook her head. "It won't work. Nothing works when it's near. It disrupts electricity, signals. It's like a living electromagnetic pulse." As if to confirm her words, the oil lamp flickered and dimmed. The fire in the hearth seemed to shrink, the shadows in the room growing deeper. "What does it want?" I whispered. "To feed," Eleanor replied simply. "It's been decades since it last took someone whole. It's patient, but persistent." The scratching stopped. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the patter of rain and the subdued crackling of the fire. Then a voice called from outside. My voice. "Eleanor, are you in there? I'm hurt. Please help me." Eleanor grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "Don't answer. Don't make a sound." My doppelganger continued to call, its pleas becoming more desperate. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every subtle characteristic of my speech replicated exactly. Had I not been inside the cabin, I would have believed it was me out there. "It learns quickly," Eleanor whispered, "mimics what it hears." "Eleanor, please!" my voice sobbed from outside. "Something's out here with me. Let me in." The rational part of my brain had shut down completely. This couldn't be happening, and yet the evidence of my senses was undeniable. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Is there another way?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "The cellar. It connects to old maintenance tunnels that run through the mountain. They were used to service the mines. We might be able to reach the road if we're lucky." A tremendous crash shook the cabin as something slammed against the door. The wood splintered but held. "Now!" Eleanor hobbled to the kitchen, pulling up a trap door hidden under a small rug. Darkness yawned below. "Take the lamp." I grabbed the oil lamp as another crash came from the door. This time, I saw it bow inward, the hinges barely holding. Whatever was out there was getting in. Eleanor descended awkwardly into the cellar. I followed, pulling the trapdoor shut above us just as a final crash and the sound of splintering wood told me the cabin had been breached. The cellar was small and dank, with stone walls and a packed earth floor. At the far end, a low tunnel led into darkness. "This way," Eleanor whispered, taking the lamp and moving toward the tunnel. "Stay close. These tunnels can be confusing." The tunnel was narrow, forcing us to crouch as we moved. The air was stale and thick with dust, making each breath an effort. Eleanor moved with surprising speed despite her disability, familiar with the path. Above us, I could hear movement in the cabin, heavy footsteps and what sounded like furniture being overturned. "It's searching for us," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible. We had traveled perhaps 50 yards when a distant sound echoed through the tunnel, the trap door being torn open. "Move," Eleanor hissed, increasing her pace. The tunnel branched several times. Eleanor chose our path without hesitation, while I quickly lost all sense of direction. We were deep within the mountain now, the tunnel occasionally widening into small chambers where mining equipment lay abandoned, rusted into unrecognizable shapes. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, the scratching, now accompanied by a low, hungry growling. "It's gaining," I gasped. "Almost there," Eleanor replied. "The tunnel widens ahead. After that, it's a straight shot to the service exit." As promised, the tunnel soon expanded into a larger passage where we could stand upright. The lamp revealed old rail tracks on the ground, another mining cart system. Eleanor pointed down the passage. "Follow this to the end. There's a ladder that leads up to a maintenance shed near the road." "You're not coming?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "I'll hold it back," she said, her face set with grim determination. "Give you time." "No, it'll kill you." A sad smile crossed her weathered face. It had its chance 30 years ago. I've been living on borrowed time ever since. Go. Live. But promise me you'll never return to these mountains. Before I could protest further, the growling grew louder. In the lamplight, I saw movement at the tunnel entrance we had just emerged from, a pale form, crawling unnaturally along the ceiling of the passage. "Go!" Eleanor shouted, shoving me down the main tunnel. She turned to face the approaching creature, drawing a large hunting knife from her boot. I ran, heart hammering in my chest, the sound of Eleanor's defiant shout echoing behind me. I didn't look back, couldn't bear to see what would happen. The tunnel seemed endless, the rails beneath my feet a constant reminder that I was following the right path. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but fear drove me forward. Eventually, I saw what I was looking for. Metal rungs embedded in the wall, leading up to a trapdoor in the ceiling. Salvation. I scrambled up the ladder, pushing against the trapdoor. It was heavy, possibly rusted shut. I strained, using all my remaining strength until finally it gave way with a groan of protesting metal. Rain hit my face as I emerged into the night air. I was in a small, dilapidated shed, its roof partially collapsed. Through the gaps, I could see the storm had intensified, lightning occasionally illuminating the landscape. I was on the mountain's opposite side, near what appeared to be an old service road. In the distance, I could make out the lights of civilization, a town in the valley below. Behind me, from the tunnel, came a wail of rage and hunger, not Eleanor's voice, something inhuman. I slammed the trapdoor shut and piled anything I could find on top of it. Old equipment, shelving, debris. It wouldn't hold the creature for long, but maybe long enough. The service road was muddy and treacherous, but it led downhill, away from the mountain. I followed it, slipping and sliding in the mud, falling several times but always getting back up. By dawn, I had reached the outskirts of a small town. Exhausted, covered in mud, and probably looking deranged, I staggered into a gas station. The attendant took one look at me and called an ambulance. I spent 3 days in the hospital, being treated for exposure, dehydration, and a dislocated shoulder I hadn't even realized I'd suffered in my fall. I told the doctors and police that I'd gotten lost hiking and taken shelter in an abandoned cabin. They seemed to accept this explanation, though I caught them exchanging concerned glances when they thought I wasn't looking. No one mentioned Eleanor Thorne. When I asked about an elderly woman living in the mountains, the local police officer just shook his head. "No one lives up there," he said. "That area's been uninhabited since the mines closed in the 60s. Too dangerous. Whole place is off limits." I insisted they check the cabin, described its location as best I could. A search and rescue team went up, but found nothing. No cabin, no Eleanor, no sign that anyone had been there recently. Just dense forest and the sealed entrance to an old mine. They concluded I had been confused due to my ordeal. Hallucinations brought on by fear and exhaustion, they said. But I know what I experienced was real. Sometimes, in my dreams, I still hear the singing, still see those eyes in the darkness, and occasionally when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I can hear scratching at my window. 5 parallel lines, over and over. I kept my promise to Eleanor. I never returned to those mountains. But I fear that what dwells there remembers me. That someday it might come looking for what escaped it. So I keep moving, never staying in one place too long. And I never, ever answer when I hear singing in the night.